Long ago, in quiet monasteries built high among clouds, monks learned that true wisdom isn't found through effort, but through stillness. When the body is at rest, the heart begins to speak. Before we start, take a deep, grounding breath. Feel it rise through the spine and fall softly through the body. Now find a comfortable position, lying down, sitting upright, or leaning against something that supports you fully. Let gravity hold you. These stories are like mountain air, clear, cool, and timeless. They invite no urgency, no competition, no outcome, only presence. If you'd like, share where you are listening from. Maybe describe the hour, night or dawn, or how the world sounds outside your window. Each of us is breathing under the same sky, listening for the same stillness. Let your exhale slow. Feel your pulse quiet. The mountain waits for no one, yet welcomes all. And with that, our story unfolds. It was the 5th night of the waxing moon. The air in Kapilavastu was still, not silent, but hushed, as though the stars had gathered at the edges of the world to listen. The palace walls breathed in jasmine and sandalwood. Lamps flickered gently. Servants whispered down the halls. And in the royal chamber, Queen Maya of the Shakya clan slept. Her breath moved softly. Her hands rested over her womb, though she did not yet know why. Outside, the moon hung high, full, radiant, unblinking. And beneath that silver light, a dream came to her. Not wild, not fevered, but clear, like water holding the shape of the moon, the dream. She found herself in a quiet grove. It was not the palace, and yet it felt familiar. There were trees, tall and old. Their trunks curved like dancers, their leaves whispering secrets from lifetimes ago. She stood barefoot, wrapped in white. No crown, no jewels, only peace. And above her, the moon glowed brighter than it ever had, a luminous pearl suspended in sky. Then the winds parted, and from the east he came. A white elephant, vast and radiant, walked across the clouds, 6 tusks curved like ivory moons. Each footstep landed without sound, as though the earth bowed beneath him. His eyes were gentle, his ears like lotus petals. His skin shimmered, not with brilliance, but with quiet power. He carried a white lotus in his trunk, and he came to her, not with force, not with haste, but with the serenity of one who knows where he is going. She did not step back. She did not fear. She simply stood and watched. And when he reached her, he bowed, as if to offer the lotus, as if to ask permission. She lowered her gaze, and in that moment, the elephant entered her side. There was no pain, only light, only warmth, as though the moon had moved into her body, as though the entire sky now rested inside her. And in that light, she saw a vision, a child, radiant, seated on a lotus, surrounded by devas and sages, stepping not into royalty, but into destiny. She saw the turning of wheels, the shifting of ages, the crumbling of illusion, and then the dream dissolved. Waking, Maya woke before the birds. The sun had not yet touched the mountains. The oil lamp beside her flickered once, then settled. The chamber was silent, but her hands, still resting over her abdomen, were warm, and her heart beat not with confusion, but with awe. She rose slowly, wrapping herself in soft cloth. She moved through the halls like moonlight and summoned her attendants. "I have seen something," she said. "Call the king, call the sages, call the dream readers and wise ones, bring the astrologers." And they came, with scrolls, with incense, with knowing eyes. She recounted every detail: the forest, the moon, the elephant, the lotus, the peace. They listened, they nodded. And at last, the eldest among them, a man with a voice like woven silk, spoke. "Your dream is not of the ordinary world. It is the sign of a great birth. The child in your womb is no ordinary prince. He will be a Chakravartin, a turner of the wheel. He will change the world. If he remains in the palace, he will become a king of kings. But if he sees the sorrows of the world, he will turn from gold to truth and become a Buddha." The king placed a hand upon her shoulder, not with doubt, but with wonder, because even he, strong, worldly, wise, felt something stirring, something vast, something that had no name yet. The months. As the days passed, the kingdom watched Queen Maya with quiet reverence. Wherever she walked, flowers bloomed slightly earlier. The air around her felt cooler, gentler. Children stopped crying as she passed. Strangers bowed, unsure why. She herself changed. She laughed more easily. She wept with the songs of birds. She dreamed of stars and rivers and ancient trees. She felt the child grow, not just within her body, but as if within the world itself. And one day, near the time of birth, she asked to travel to her ancestral home. It was the tradition of her people, but more than tradition, it was a quiet longing. The king arranged everything: silks and guards, chariots and attendants. But Maya moved simply. She chose only a few companions and rode through forests and open roads beneath a sky filled with soft clouds. The birth. They stopped at Lumbini, a grove of sal trees, green and peaceful. The sun filtered through the canopy. The wind carried the scent of blossoms. Birdsong drifted like prayer. Maya stepped down, drawn to the trees. She held a branch, looked upward, and in that moment, beneath the same moon she had seen in her dream, she gave birth. The child came easily, without struggle, without fear. He did not cry. He simply opened his eyes, wide and calm. And the legends say he took 7 steps, that lotus flowers bloomed beneath each foot, that he raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth and said, "I am born for the benefit of all beings." The attendants wept. The forest fell silent, and the trees, it is said, bowed ever so slightly toward the child. Maya held him to her chest, and though she had seen him in vision, this was different. This was not dream. This was real. The warmth of skin, the weight of life, the beginning of something vast and quiet and beautiful. After, she did not live long after the birth. Some say it was destiny. That one who gives birth to a Buddha must return to the heavens. That her role was complete. Others say she became a guiding spirit, watching over him from a celestial realm. offering protection in moments when the path turned dark. But her presence never vanished. The child, Siddhartha, would one day walk away from his palace, would one day sit beneath a tree and awaken, would one day teach the world how to end suffering. But it began here, with a dream, with a white elephant, with a moonlit vow whispered across the veil of sleep, and with a mother who said yes, because every journey begins before we can name it. Every great awakening begins in the quiet, and sometimes the first step toward truth is a dream. The young monk spoke with confidence. He had studied for years. He had memorized the sutras, debated the Dharma, written essays on emptiness and non-self. Now he stood before Master Obaku, hoping to impress him. "What is the ultimate truth of Buddhism?" he asked, bowing low. The question was polished, prepared, even reverent. But Obaku said nothing. Instead, he stepped forward and shouted, loud, sudden, like thunder cracking a still lake. The monk stumbled backward, heart racing. His thoughts vanished. His pride scattered like startled birds. And for a moment, just one brief, breathless moment, his mind stopped. No questions, no answers, just space, raw and awake. That was the lesson. A shout. Not of anger, but of compassion. Not to belittle, but to break. To shatter the walls of thinking that separate seeker from truth. In the Zen tradition, this is known as katsu, a fierce cry. A single wordless eruption that pierces through the mind's constant noise. Obaku used it like a blade, not to wound, but to cut away illusion, to jolt the student out of the fog of thought. Because sometimes, you don't need more understanding. You need a wake-up call. Think of a dream. You're walking through it, believing it, responding to it. Then someone shouts your name. You jolt awake and realize none of it was real. Obaku's shout was like that, not a teaching, a waking. Years later, the monk returned. He bowed before Obaku and said, "I finally understand why you shouted." Obaku smiled and said, "Then forget that I ever did." Because even the memory of awakening can become another concept, another prison. Zen cuts not just through delusion, but through the attachment to insight itself. Obaku was a teacher of few words, but when he spoke or shouted, he struck deep. Once another student asked him, "What is the path to liberation?" Obaku raised his fist. The student said nothing, then bowed, because in that moment he understood. The path was this. Not words about liberation, but the raw, silent, direct presence of the fist before him. Western minds often recoil from this. We're trained to expect kindness to be soft, truth to be calm, teachers to be gentle. But in Zen, compassion doesn't always whisper. Sometimes it roars, because the cage of the thinking mind is strong, and it takes a powerful noise to break it. Obaku's shout was not personal, it was not performance. It was pure action, free from hesitation, free from agenda. A sound that came from no self, and landed in the heart like a bell. Another story is told. A monk was dozing off during meditation. Obaku walked behind him, raised his staff, and struck the ground beside him, hard. The monk jolted upright, eyes wide. The master said only, "If you sleep through life, You will dream of Zen, but never wake to it." The monk bowed. He never fell asleep in the hall again. These moments are not cruel. They are kindness without comfort, because comfort can lull us into dreaming. But Zen is the practice of waking, again and again, until waking becomes your natural state, until presence is all you need. Imagine someone drowning in shallow water. You don't throw them a book about swimming. You pull them up, sometimes roughly, but always with love. That is Obaku's shout, a hand reaching through illusion, grabbing you by the robe and saying, "Wake up." Commentary. Not all teachings arrive gently. Some arrive like a storm, like cold water to the face, like a sound so loud it shakes the thoughts out of your spine. Because truth is not fragile. It doesn't need to be whispered. It just needs to be heard. And often the most compassionate thing a teacher can do is stop trying to explain and simply interrupt. Interrupt the story. Interrupt the me. Interrupt the years of polite ego dressed up as spirituality. Obaku knew this. He wasn't teaching Buddhism, he was teaching freedom. And sometimes freedom begins not with understanding, but with a single sharp, sacred shout. If you walk away from Zen with nothing but quotes, you've missed it. If you remember the stories but never felt the cut, you're still dreaming. But if something within you, some soft center you didn't know you had, felt this story not as words, but as thunder, then maybe, just maybe, you've begun to wake up. Before time was measured by stars, before mountains were named, before the sutras had been spoken, there was a vow. A single vow, whispered not to the heavens, but to the suffering of the world. I will not enter nirvana until all beings are free. This was the vow of Avalokiteshvara, the bodhisattva of compassion, not a god, not a savior, but a being who heard the cries of the world and stayed. In Sanskrit, his name means the one who hears the sounds of the world. In China, he is Guanyin, the one who listens. In Tibet, Chenrezig, the gentle-eyed protector. In Japan, Kannon, the goddess with a gaze like soft rain. He takes many forms, male, female, neither, all, because compassion is not bound by gender. It is a response, a presence, a hand that reaches out before the mind decides whether or not to help. The story begins long ago in the celestial realms where Avalokiteshvara practiced deeply and tirelessly. Lifetime after lifetime, he worked to free beings from suffering. He taught, he healed, he carried, he wept, and still the suffering did not end. Every time a life was soothed, 10 more were in pain. Every time one was saved, another was lost. One day, Avalokiteshvara stood at the edge of reality and looked down upon the world. He heard every cry, every mother losing a child, every man begging for bread, every animal caught in a trap, every being trapped in anger, desire, confusion. And in that moment, his heart broke. Not figuratively, it shattered. His body split into pieces, his head burst into 11 parts, his arms cracked and fell. His vow seemed too vast, the pain of others too great. And from the silence that followed, he wept. I have failed, he whispered. I cannot save them all. But the universe listens in strange ways. And just as Avalokiteshvara reached the edge of despair, a light appeared. Amida Buddha, the Buddha of infinite light, came forth. Gently, patiently, lovingly. He gathered the pieces. He said nothing of failure. Only this: you broke not from weakness, but because your compassion was real. And with a soft breath, Amida blessed Avalokiteshvara's broken form and transformed it. Now he had 11 heads to see in every direction and 1,000 arms, each with an eye in its palm to both see and act. Hands that could reach into every corner of the world. Hands that could soothe, protect, feed, carry, hold, mend. Not all hands were soft. Some held weapons to cut through illusion. Others held lotus flowers to cradle the broken. Some formed mudras of peace. Others reached out with empty palms. Each hand was compassion expressed. Each hand was love in action. This is why Avalokiteshvara did not abandon the world. Because even in despair, he did not turn away. Because real compassion isn't about success. It's about showing up again and again, even when it seems hopeless. Especially when it seems hopeless. There's a story told in temples. A monk once asked a master, "What is Avalokiteshvara doing with so many arms and eyes?" The master replied, "It's like a man reaching for a pillow in the night. He does it without thinking." That is the heart of compassion. No calculation, no pride, just the instinct to help. Because suffering is not theoretical. It is immediate, and so compassion must be too. In the iconography, each hand of Avalokiteshvara holds a symbol. A wheel, a bell, a jewel, a book, a rope, a vajra, a bowl, a tear. Because compassion wears many forms. Sometimes it's guidance, sometimes it's protection, sometimes it's nourishment, sometimes it's just being with someone who is grieving without fixing it. In one form, Avalokiteshvara appears with only 2 hands. One holds a lotus, symbol of purity rising from the mud. The other holds a vase, pouring the nectar of healing into the world. Because even with just 2 hands, if moved by compassion, you can save lives. In the Mahayana tradition, to walk the Bodhisattva path is to walk in Avalokiteshvara's footsteps, to take the vow, not for glory, not for escape, but for others, for the one crying next door, for the stranger across the world, for the part of yourself still in pain. There's a saying, when compassion truly arises, there is no I helping you, only the act itself. That is Avalokiteshvara. Not a being to worship, but a mirror, a reminder of what you already are. When you listen with your whole body, when you act before being asked, when you feel another's pain like your own and still choose to love, you become one of the 1,000 hands. Commentary. This story is not mythology, it's instruction. You may not have 1,000 arms, but you have one. You may not have an eye in every palm, but you have awareness, and that is enough. Avalokiteshvara broke not from weakness, but from caring too much, and instead of being punished for it, he was expanded. His brokenness became his beauty. His sorrow became his vow. So if you ever feel too tender for this world, if you feel like your heart breaks too easily, you are not broken. You are awakening. You are listening. You are already walking the path of Avalokiteshvara. As we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen Buddhism, let us turn to a tale about recognition and the true nature of worth. This is the next story. A monk once traveled alone through a deep forest. He'd been walking for days, through mud, through heat, through cold rain. He carried nothing but a worn robe, a begging bowl, and a satchel with a single stone inside. Why the stone? He could not say, only that a teacher once gave it to him and said, "Carry this until you understand its weight." The monk took it literally, and dutifully he carried the stone. At first, it seemed like nothing, but as the months passed, over hills, across rivers, through deserts, it began to burden him. His back ached, his hands calloused, his mind grew resentful. "Why must I carry this?" he muttered one evening, dropping beside a creek. He looked at the stone, round, dark, unremarkable. A simple weight, and yet it had become everything. That night, he slept beneath the stars, and he dreamed. In the dream, he stood in an endless field beneath a vast open sky. He held the stone tightly, afraid to drop it, afraid he might lose something important. Then a voice, calm and distant, whispered, "Are you carrying the stone, or is the stone carrying you?" He awoke just before dawn, heart racing. The sky above him was pale and soft, wide and light. He looked at the stone again and understood. This is the story of thoughts, identity, and the illusion of burdens, how what we cling to becomes our weight. Commentary. Many of us carry stones, regret, shame, an old story someone once told us about who we are, a wound we've wrapped ourselves around for so long it feels like identity. We think we're being strong, but strength is not clinging. It's knowing when to let go. The monk carried the stone because he trusted his teacher. But trust without inquiry is like walking in darkness without asking if there's a door. His real practice began not when he received the stone, but when he questioned it. The Buddha taught that suffering arises from attachment, even to things that seem noble, tradition, memory, belief, self-image. We say this is who I am, but who is saying it? And what happens when the self no longer fits? The stone was not the problem. The gripping was. The fear of what it meant to be without it. We carry pain from the past because we think dropping it means forgetting. We carry roles that no longer serve us because we think they are us. We carry anger because we think it protects us. But a clenched fist cannot hold the sky. Later that day, the monk stood on a hilltop and watched the clouds pass. He held the stone in both hands, not angrily, not resentfully, just with awareness, and then he set it gently on the ground, not thrown, not discarded, just returned. A breeze touched his robe. The clouds shifted. He took his next step, and it felt like the first. In that moment, he realized the sky had always been there, unbothered, unburdened, vast, and that somewhere along the way, he had confused being grounded with being weighed down. This is the nature of the mind. It can be like a stone, heavy, fixated, stuck in the past, or like the sky, open, vast, always able to hold the weather without becoming it. The monk never told others to drop their stones. He simply told this story and ended it with a question. What are you carrying that is carrying you? So, pause today. Look gently at the weight in your hands, your heart, your mind, and ask yourself, do I still need this to walk? Or have I mistaken the stone for my path? In a quiet valley, where mist clung to the morning hills and cranes walked through the wet grass, there lived an old farmer. His hands were rough from years of work, his back bent slightly, not from age, but from reverence for the earth. Each spring, without fail, he would walk into the flooded fields barefoot, carrying a satchel of seeds against his chest. And there, ankle deep in cold water, he would plant each rice seedling by hand. One, then another, then another. Row after row, hour after hour. One morning, a traveller passed by and watched the old man working. "Isn't there a faster way?" he called. The farmer didn't look up. "No." "But can't you just scatter the seeds and let them grow?" The farmer paused, then looked up, his face weathered by sun and time. He held up a single seedling, delicate and green. "If I rush this," he said, "it breaks." And then he smiled. "If I wait, it feeds a village." That is the lesson of the rice seedling. Not speed, not force, but patience. Because some things, especially the most important things, cannot be hurried. They need water, warmth, space, and time. We live in a world that rushes. We want answers now, results now, relief now. But the Dharma, like rice, grows slowly. You sit on the cushion. You breathe. Thoughts rise like insects on the water. You breathe again. Nothing seems to change. But underground, beneath your noticing, something roots itself. Just as the seed splits in darkness before any green breaks the surface. There is a story from the Buddha's life. A man came to him, desperate for wisdom. He asked for enlightenment in a single sitting. The Buddha said, "How long did it take the mango tree to bear fruit?" The man shrugged. "I don't know, a few seasons." The Buddha nodded. "And how many times did you pull at its branches to make it grow faster?" The man blinked. "None. That would harm it." The Buddha smiled. "Then why do you do that to your mind?" A rice seedling cannot be coaxed with impatience. It cannot be screamed into sprouting. It will not bloom on command. But if you plant it, nourish it, protect it from harm, it grows. And when the time is right, it gives back. Generously, silently, completely. Patience is not passivity. It is an active trust. It is waking every day to tend what may not show results. It is believing that something unseen is forming. Not because of magic, but because that is how life moves. There is another story. A young monk grew frustrated with his progress. He complained to his teacher, "I've been practicing for months. I still feel restless, still distracted, still myself." The teacher led him outside, pointed to the mountain, and said, "You're like someone walking uphill while staring at their feet. You can't see how far you've come because you're only looking at the mud. Growth is rarely visible when it's happening. You notice it in hindsight, in the way you respond to difficulty, in the way you hold silence, in the way you speak a little softer when someone's voice shakes. That is the seedling rising. Sometimes the field floods, sometimes birds eat the first shoot. Sometimes the sun is too strong, and still, the farmer returns. He doesn't uproot everything in frustration. He doesn't curse the seed. He waits. He plants again. Because patience is not about perfect conditions. It's about keeping faith through imperfect ones. Commentary. The rice seedling is not just a symbol. It is a mirror. A reminder that your growth does not need to be dramatic to be real. That your slow, quiet efforts are not wasted. That every time you return to your breath, every time you choose presence over distraction, every time you pause before reacting, you are planting something. And like the farmer, you may not see it today, you may not see it next week, but one day when someone asks how you became calm or kind or steady dash, you'll smile and think of all those unseen days, all those early mornings in the field, all those seedlings that grew while no one was watching. The path is long, but you are walking it, and that is enough. In the 17th century, Japan was changing. Temples were quiet. Monks walked with their hands folded inside sleeves, heads bowed against the cold wind of politics, poverty, and war. But in Kyoto, a monk named Tetsugen Doko had a dream: to bring the sutras, the sacred texts of the Buddha, to the people. Not locked away in elite monasteries, not spoken only in the high Chinese script of scholars, but printed, in Japanese, on paper, so the common farmer, the weaver, the rice merchant, and the child sweeping the temple steps could read the Buddha's words. He would print them, all of them, in woodblock form, an enormous undertaking. Tetsugen began with nothing, no paper, no ink, no press, no woodblocks, just a robe, a bowl, and a vow. So he traveled the countryside, bowl in hand, asking for donations, not for himself, but for the words of the Dharma. At first, people were skeptical. A monk with no monastery, a printing press as a spiritual act. But Tetsugen spoke with quiet conviction. He did not pressure. He did not persuade. He simply bowed and spoke of a dream where truth could be read by all. And slowly, the donations came. Coins, rice, a silver hairpin from a widow, a child's carved flute. One woman brought a single perfect sheet of handmade paper and said, "I cannot read, but may this help someone who can." Years passed. Tetsugen traveled through mountain towns and port cities. He walked in sun, in snow, in silence. The money piled up, not in bags, but in faith, until finally, he had enough. Enough for paper, ink, carvers, labor. The work could begin, but then disaster struck. The Uji River flooded. A great famine swept across the land. Families went hungry. Children cried into bowls of water. And Tetsugen looked at the money he had gathered. He did not hesitate. He gave every coin to relief. Food was bought, homes were rebuilt, the suffering eased, and the printing dream disappeared for a time. When the crisis passed, Tetsugen began again. From zero, bowl in hand, dust on his feet. The same quiet voice, The same calm vow. This time, people gave more quickly. They remembered, they trusted. He gathered enough once more. The press was readied, woodblocks carved. Then, epidemic. A plague swept through Kyoto. The poor collapsed in alleys. Temples turned into infirmaries. And once again, Tetsugen gave all the money away. The third time, he began again. Older now, slower, but steady. His vow never cracked, and after many years, the sutras were finally printed in 7,000 woodblocks, hand-carved and inked with devotion. The first complete Japanese printing of the Buddhist canon. Even today, the blocks are preserved at Obaku Monastery in Kyoto, a monument to patience, to persistence, to presence. But ask a Zen master about Tetsugen's sutras, and they will smile and say, yes, he printed 3 editions, but the first 2 are the most beautiful. Commentary. Zen is not impressed by grand gestures, it is moved by quiet truth. Tetsugen's vow was not to ink, not to paper, but to service. And so, when suffering appeared, he did not cling to his dream. He let it go, not out of failure, but out of deeper practice. The first 2 editions were never printed, but they were lived. Printed in rice, in shelter, in the body of a starving child who lived because of his decision. Printed in the woman who kept her husband another year because Tetsugen paid for medicine instead of woodblocks. Printed in the hearts of strangers who saw that the Dharma is not words, but action. The third edition, that was just the form. The content had already been carved in compassion. Tetsugen teaches us, your vow is not what you say when it's easy. It's what you do when it costs you. And in those moments, when your deepest aspiration must bend to the needs of others, that is the real test of the way. We all have sutras we want to print, projects, dreams, a book, a vision, a calling. And often, the world interrupts, crisis, illness, family, but Zen does not see this as failure. It sees it as opportunity to offer, to release, to serve something greater than the plan. And when the time is right, you return, you begin again. Because nothing is lost. Each pause is part of the rhythm. Each surrender shapes the heart. Each detour deepens the vow. There is no need to rush. If the heart remains clear, even a delay becomes Dharma. Even an interruption becomes a verse. Even a famine becomes a teaching. Tetsugen walked the mountains for decades, but the greatest thing he carried was patience, a faith that giving is not giving up, and that sometimes the invisible sutras are the ones that save us most. As we move deeper into the quiet teachings of Zen, we come to a story about seeing clearly and understanding true value. Listen carefully to the next story. In the still hush before dawn, the palace of Kapilavastu stirred with the soft rustle of silks and the distant rhythm of footfalls on marble. The world outside was already unfolding, but within the gilded walls where Prince Siddhartha lived, every petal was sheltered from the wind of suffering. No wrinkles marred the faces of the attendants. No cries of illness echoed through the halls. No one spoke of death. His father, King Suddhodana, had ensured that his son knew only ease, beauty, and delight. The astrologers had predicted that the young prince would become either a great king or a holy man who would renounce the world. Fearing the latter, the king built a world without shadows. Flowers were changed before they wilted. Servants were chosen for their youth and radiance. Pain was not allowed to show its face. But truth, like the sun, cannot be hidden forever. And yearning, like a seed buried deep, will reach for the light even through stone. On a day shaped like any other, Siddhartha requested to ride beyond the palace gates. He was 29, cloaked in fine fabric and surrounded by careful illusions. Yet something inside him whispered of incompleteness, like a bell struck in the distance that would not stop ringing. There was a tightness in his chest he could not name, a hollowness that no feast or dance could fill. The charioteer Channa guided the prince through the streets of the city. The morning was bright, the people beautiful, the air filled with jasmine. Musicians played in courtyards, children laughed in sunbeams, all seemed perfect. But then the illusion cracked. At the edge of a quiet street, they saw a man hunched and trembling. His hair was white, his back bowed by years. His skin sagged like parchment, and his hands clutched a stick. He moved slowly, as though the air itself had thickened around him. Siddhartha leaned forward. "Channa," he asked, "what is wrong with that man?" "That is old age, my lord," Channa replied. "It comes to all who live long. The body weakens, the bones bend, the senses dull. No one escapes it." The prince stared at the man as he passed, the way he paused to catch his breath, the way his eyes seemed clouded with time. Siddhartha's hands gripped the side of the chariot. "Will this come to me?" he asked. "Yes, my lord, to you, to me, to all." Siddhartha fell silent. The first veil had lifted. The garden he had lived in was not eternal. Beneath the fragrance was decay. Beneath the music was silence. The next day, restless and inwardly stirred, he asked to go again. And again the world revealed another layer. As they turned a corner, Siddhartha saw a man collapsed by the roadside. His face was contorted in pain, his skin grey and clammy. His limbs twisted unnaturally, and he coughed as if his lungs were full of fire. "And this?" Siddhartha asked. "This is sickness, my lord," Channa said gently. "It strikes without warning. It takes the strong and lays them low. There is no rank or title that shields against it." The prince watched as a woman tried to cool the man's brow, her eyes wide with helplessness. A child clung to her skirts. Siddhartha turned away, but the image would not leave him. How many in his palace had hidden such suffering behind closed doors? How much of the world had he not seen? On the third day, the air hung heavy with heat. A solemn hush drifted through the streets. Siddhartha and Channa followed the sound of quiet chanting and saw a procession winding through the alleys. Men carried a shrouded form on a wooden bier, garlands laid across it. Behind them, mourners walked with bowed heads, incense curling in the air. "Is he asleep?" the prince asked, though he already knew. "He is dead, my lord," Channa replied. "This is the fate of all who are born." The prince felt something deep within him fracture. He watched the faces of the mourners, their grief like a tide with no shore. The man on the bier would never speak again, never eat, never laugh. All that he was had ended. And this comes to everyone. Everyone, my lord. The rich, the poor, the wise, the foolish. Siddhartha did not speak on the way back. The chariot wheels hummed against the stone, but his thoughts made no sound. The world had split open. Beneath the silks, beneath the pleasures, there was something hollow, a truth too vast to ignore. He lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling. His wife, Yasodhara, slept beside him. Their son, Rahula, breathed softly in the next room. And yet, peace evaded him. He saw the old man, the sick man, the corpse. He saw them behind every smile, beneath every ornament. He knew now that no palace could protect against time. No love could shield against loss. No beauty could outpace decay. And then, on the fourth day, they rode out once more. This time, they saw a man in saffron robes, walking barefoot along the path. His eyes were calm, his steps steady. He carried no gold, wore no jewelry. His face bore the lines of both suffering and peace. "Who is that?" Siddhartha asked. "A seeker, my lord," Channa said. "One who has renounced the world to find the path beyond birth and death. One who walks in search of freedom." Siddhartha watched him until he vanished into the distance. No guards flanked him, no luxuries trailed behind, and yet something about the man radiated a serenity deeper than anything Siddhartha had known. That night, the prince stood at the edge of his sleeping son's cradle, not daring to wake him. He touched the boy's soft cheek, his heart torn between two loves, the love of his family and the love of truth. He stepped into the garden one last time, its scent bittersweet. He bowed before the moonlit statue of his ancestors, and with each step toward the gate, he shed a piece of his former self. His earrings, his sword, his silks. He left that night, into the forest, into silence, into the unknown. The four sights had shattered his illusion, but they had also opened the gate. And on the other side of that gate was the beginning of a path. The path that would change the world. The boy stood barefoot in the dust. Beyond the village, where the rice paddies gave way to forest, he searched. The sun hung low, casting long shadows through the bamboo groves. A wind stirred the leaves, but he did not move. His eyes scanned the ground for tracks, for broken twigs, for any sign of the ox. He had lost it, or perhaps he had never truly found it. And so began the journey, not of chasing, but of remembering. In Zen tradition, the ox-herding pictures are a series of 10 images, each one a moment in the path toward awakening, not literal, not linear, but true in the way that poetry is true. They begin with a search. A boy looking for an ox. But the ox is not made of flesh. It is the self, the mind, the original nature. The Buddha within, hidden beneath thought, lost in distraction, masked by craving. And the boy, he is all of us. First, searching for the ox, the boy leaves the village. He's tired of ordinary life. He's heard rumors of peace, of awakening, of something real beneath the noise. So he begins to search. He reads sutras, he listens to teachers, he sits in meditation. But his mind is full of fog. Thoughts crowd his vision. Doubt clings like vines. Still, he continues, because something inside him knows there is more than this. 2. Seeing the traces. One morning, while gathering wood, he sees a bent stalk, then a hoof print in the mud. His heart jumps. Maybe I'm close. He kneels, follows the signs. In his practice, he notices moments of stillness. A breath that feels vast, a silence that doesn't feel empty. Just hints, traces, but enough to give him hope. 3. Catching sight of the ox. Suddenly, there it is, a glimpse through the trees, a flash of black hide, a tail flick. The boy freezes, joy rises, and fear. Because now it's real, not just a concept, not just a goal. The ox exists, but it is wild. It does not come when called, and when the boy steps closer, it bolts. 4th, catching the ox. He runs, he sweats, he stumbles. At last, he grabs the rope. The ox bucks, throws its weight against him. It drags him through the grass, but he holds tight. This is the phase of discipline, of hard practice, of struggling with the mind that wants to flee. It takes effort, structure, ritual. Again and again he pulls the ox back, until finally it yields. Not because it is broken, but because it begins to trust. 5. Taming the ox. Now he walks beside it, still holding the rope but not fighting. He brushes its coat, feeds it grain. They sit together beneath a tree. This is calm abiding. Meditation deepens. The mind, once unruly, now rests beside him like a friend. Joy rises, not from excitement, but from peace. 6. Riding the ox home. The boy climbs on its back. He plays the flute as they travel. There's laughter now. The ox no longer resists. They are one motion, one rhythm. The self and the selfless walking home together. Some think this is the end, but it is not. There is more, always more. 7. The ox transcended. One morning, he wakes, and the ox is gone. Not lost, gone. Dissolved. Because there was never a separate ox. Only the illusion of separation. There is no one taming another. No duality. Only being, only suchness. The boy sits in silence, and everything is enough. 8. Both ox and self-forgotten. Now, not even the boy remains. No watcher, no watched. Just sky, wind, movement without mover, compassion without identity, peace without object. This is awakening. Not a peak to climb, but a dissolving of the climber. 9. Returning to the source. But even this is not the end. He returns to the world, to the place he left behind. The village, the noise, the errands. He no longer seeks to escape it. Because the sacred is here too, in the washing of bowls, in the crying of babies, in the marketplace and the broom. 10th, entering the marketplace with open hands. He walks through the village, dirty feet, laughing eyes, no halo, no robe, just a man carrying firewood and smiling at children. He does not preach, does not speak of truth. He simply helps, lends a hand, bows to beggars, listens without interrupting, because he carries nothing and gives everything. Commentary: the ox herding. Pictures are not a ladder, they are a mirror. We move forward, then fall back, then forward again. Sometimes we glimpse the ox for a moment, then lose it for years. And that's okay, because the journey is not about getting somewhere. It's about seeing clearly where we are. The boy is not special. He is not a saint. He is you. Waking up slowly, letting go gently, returning home freely, and realizing it was never the ox that was missing, only the one who thought it was separate. The forest was silent. A slow dawn brushed the canopy with gold, and the earth exhaled the cool breath of night. Beneath the tall trees, a single figure sat unmoving, his presence vast, his stillness deeper than the roots below him. This was Samantabhadra, the Bodhisattva of great action. Where Avalokiteshvara hears the cries of the world, Samantabhadra responds, not just with compassion, but with commitment, with vow, with doing. In Sanskrit, his name means universal worthy. He is the embodiment of enlightened action, not theoretical, but lived. In temples across East Asia, he is depicted riding a white elephant with 6 tusks, each representing one of the 6 paramitas, perfections of a bodhisattva: generosity, discipline, patience, vigor, meditation, wisdom. The elephant is steady, strong, humble. It does not race. It carries, because the path of action is not haste. It is devotion. Samantabhadra is not remembered for miracles. He is remembered for vows. In the Avatamsaka Sutra, a vision of infinite Buddhas and worlds, he stands before countless beings and declares, I vow to honor all Buddhas, to make offerings, to confess mistakes, to rejoice in goodness, to request teaching, to stay in the world, to follow the path, to live for others, to turn the wheel of Dharma, to dedicate all merit for the awakening of all beings. 10 vast vows, 10 immeasurable currents of action. And still, he made more, because Samantabhadra's compassion does not stop at feeling, it becomes form. There's a story told in the mountains of Sichuan. A wandering monk came to a temple where the image of Samantabhadra stood tall, ornate, golden, seated atop the elephant. The monk bowed, then whispered, Great Bodhisattva, what is your practice? And in his mind, a voice replied, Whatever brings benefit, I do it. The monk frowned. But how do I know what will help? The voice was soft. When your mind forgets the self, every step becomes service. This is the heart of Samantabhadra, not just knowing what is good, but doing it, even when tired, even when no one sees, even when the benefit is invisible. Some bodhisattvas sit in meditation, others speak sutras. Samantabhadra cleans the floor, carries the sick, plants trees he will never see grow, because his practice is not abstract. It is bodily, it is effort, and it is choice. In the West, we often associate wisdom with silence, stillness, detachment. But Mahayana Buddhism offers a different view. That wisdom and action are not separate. That the awakened mind moves, not compulsively, but naturally, like water down a mountain. Samantabhadra teaches, if you bow, bow completely. If you eat, eat with gratitude. If you work, work with your whole body. If you vow, live the vow. A novice once asked a Zen master, "What is the most advanced form of practice?" The master pointed to the broom, then to the rice pot, then to the novice's own worn sandals. "Whatever needs doing," he said, Do it completely. In this way, Samantabhadra is not lofty. He is practical. He does not ask you to fly. He asks you to stay grounded and keep going, to help even one being, to smile even once for someone who is suffering, to remember that in a single action, sweeping, bowing, cooking, there can be immeasurable merit when done with a mind of service. There's a teaching. A bodhisattva never asks, "Will this be noticed?" A bodhisattva asks, "Does this help?" In modern life, we are busy. We're taught to measure action by its results, but Samantabhadra teaches boundless action, where the result is not yours to keep, where the act itself is enough, where planting a seed you'll never see flower is not foolish, it is sacred. Commentary. Samantabhadra is not a figure on a pedestal. He is a mirror. He shows us that enlightenment is not an escape from the world. It is a return to it, fully awake, with sleeves rolled, with hands open, with vows not recited but lived. The white elephant is not fast, but it is strong. It does not seek applause. It just walks, one foot after the other, one act after the next, and the bodhisattva upon it smiles. Because every breath is part of the vow. To follow Samantabhadra is not to be perfect. It is to be willing, to step forward, to show up, to fall down, and vow again. Because the path is long, but every step walked in service becomes joy. With each step on the Zen path, a new lesson unfolds. Now we turn to a story about recognition, of self, of others, and of what truly matters. Listen carefully to the next story. The tree stood at the edge of the world. Its roots gripped the earth like memory. Its branches reached toward the sky like longing, and beneath it sat a man, still as a mountain, breathing, watching, waiting. His name had once been Siddhartha, but that name now lay behind him like a robe folded and left at the forest's edge. He had left palaces, left hunger, left both indulgence and denial. And now, with the moon rising above the horizon and the world softening into dusk, he sat beneath the Bodhi tree, not in search, but in surrender. His legs were crossed, his hands rested lightly in his lap. The breath moved through him like wind through reeds, slow, even, empty of grasping. He had made a vow. Though my skin withers, though my bones turn to dust, I will not rise from this seat until I see clearly, until I find the end of suffering. And so the night began. The stars emerged like scattered seeds across the dark. The forest exhaled, animals stirred, the air cooled. Siddhartha's mind turned inward, like a lamp flame drawing into itself. He began to see, not with eyes, but with knowing. Visions came, clear, unforced, as if someone were whispering his past to him, life by life. He saw himself born in countless forms, as man, as woman, as child, as beast, as merchant, as slave, as prince, as pauper. Each life blooming and withering, each desire rising and fading, each birth followed by loss. He saw himself die 1,000 deaths, not with fear, but with clarity, and for the first time he understood. The self is not fixed. It moves, it changes, it clings, it returns. He watched the thread of his existence unspool across time, and yet something beyond the thread remained still. He did not speak, he did not stir, but inside him, a door creaked open, and he stepped through. Midnight deepened. The forest held its breath. The moon climbed higher, softening the world in silver. Now he turned his gaze outward, not with judgment, but with compassion. He saw the lives of others, their births and deaths, their joys and sorrows, rising and falling like waves. He saw kings and criminals, lovers and thieves, monks and warriors, all bound by the same law, karma, intentions like seeds, actions like water, and from them the fruits of joy or suffering. He saw that no life stood alone. Each was a thread in a vast net. Each thought, each choice, each word sent ripples outward, reaching far beyond the speaker, the thinker, the doer. He saw how hatred returned as hatred, how greed bore more hunger, how ignorance looped endlessly like a wheel spinning in sand. And he saw too how kindness softened sorrow, how generosity opened hearts, how truth, spoken gently, could shatter lifetimes of illusion. And still, he sat, breathing, watching. The net of becoming stretched before him, vast, intricate, impossible to escape. Unless one saw the threads for what they were, not chains, but illusions. He closed his eyes, and the world began to tremble. The deepest hour of night, not even owls cried now, not even leaves moved, and within him, the final door unlocked. He turned his mind to the cause of suffering. Why do we suffer? Why do we cling? Why do we fear? And the answer rose, not like thunder, but like morning, clear, simple, radiant. He saw it all in a single breath. Ignorance gives rise to craving. Craving gives rise to clinging. Clinging leads to becoming. Becoming to birth. Birth to sorrow, decay, and death. And so the wheel turns. Again and again. But he also saw how it could be stopped. Not with violence, not with denial, but with clarity. With the eightfold path. Like stepping stones across a great river. Right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He saw that suffering was not a punishment, nor a curse, nor a mystery. It was a path, and paths could be walked, and walked until they ended. And as the final shadow lifted from his mind, as the first bird stirred in the distant branches, it happened, not a flash, not a voice, not a miracle, but a knowing, a deep, still knowing. He had awoken. The sun crested the hills, slow and golden. The mist curled like incense through the trees. And Siddhartha, now the Buddha, opened his eyes. He looked out over the world, not with desire, not with fear, but with compassion so vast it had no name. He saw children born into love and hunger. He saw soldiers sharpening swords. He saw merchants counting coins. He saw mothers weeping over small graves. And he wept, not with sadness, but with tenderness, because they were all still sleeping, not foolish, not broken, just dreaming. He had been asleep once too, and now he was awake. It is said that Mara, the Lord of Illusion, came one last time, not with armies, not with demons, but with a whisper. "Now that you are free," he said, "leave them behind. They will not understand. They will mock you. They will twist your words. They will forget." And the Buddha listened. He sat with that thought, the thought of peace in solitude, of disappearing into the forest, of vanishing beyond suffering alone. But then he saw a farmer rising to begin the day. He saw a child carrying water. He saw a girl humming a tune she did not know was ancient. And he knew they were not lost, just tired, just waiting, just needing someone to show them the way back to themselves. So he turned to Mara and said, "They will understand. Some will. Even one is enough." And Mara vanished. He stood slowly, the grass beneath him still wet with dew. His knees ached, but his heart did not. He took his bowl, his robe, his breath, and began to walk toward the village, toward the people, toward the long road of teaching. He would speak not of gods, nor of punishments, nor of sacred fire, but of suffering and how to end it, of breath and how to follow it, of kindness and how to live it. And so the man who once left his son sleeping, who had starved beneath trees, who had faced demons and silence and the unraveling of self, walked down from the Bodhi tree. And the world, though it did not know it yet, had already begun to wake. Because one man had seen clearly, had sat still, had not run, and had touched the truth. And from that stillness, a path was born for all the world to walk. The wind in Lumbini moved gently, like breath held between two worlds. It was spring, the trees were in bloom, and the sal branches swayed with the weight of 1,000 white blossoms, drifting like snow through sunlight. The grove itself had always been sacred, but on this day, it held its breath, because something was about to happen. Queen Maya of Kapilavastu had travelled far. Her time was near, and by custom, she had chosen to give birth in her family's village. The journey had been long, but gentle. Attendants walked quietly beside her. The sky stayed clear, and the earth itself seemed to soften beneath their steps. When they reached Lumbini, Maya smiled. Here, the air was different, cooler, still. The light filtered through the trees in beams so soft they looked like silk. She stepped down from her carriage, removed her sandals, and walked barefoot into the grove. Birds did not flee. They simply paused. At the center of the grove stood a tall sal tree, wide-branched and flowering. She reached for a low branch and rested her hand upon it. She did not cry out. She did not tremble. She breathed. And there, beneath the trees upon the earth in silence, a child was born. He did not enter with a cry. He entered with awareness. His eyes opened wide, dark and deep like the night before rain. His skin was said to shine with a glow not of this world, and the breeze, once soft, began to stir the leaves as if to sing. Attendants rushed forward. The midwife covered her mouth. The sky turned golden for a breath, and legend says that the flowers on the sal tree bent low to witness. The child did not wait to be carried. He stood. He took 7 steps, and with each step, where his foot touched the ground, a lotus bloomed. Not imagined, not metaphor, but real, petals unfurled beneath his heels. Fragrance filled the air. And the world paused. Animals stopped their grazing. Streams paused their song. And even the wind, surprised by the holiness of the moment, turned back to watch. When the seventh step was taken, the boy raised one hand to the sky and one to the earth. And in a voice that was not learned but remembered, he said, "In this life, I am born for the benefit of all beings. This is my final birth. I will put an end to suffering." It is said that the Devas, gods of distant realms, gathered in silence, their hands folded, their eyes lowered, because something rare had occurred. A bodhisattva, fully awakened in past lives, had returned to walk the earth once more. Heavenly flowers fell through the air. Trumpets sounded without instruments. Celestial beings whispered blessings the humans could not hear. And yet even those on earth, who had no names for such wonders, felt the shift. One man wept without knowing why. One horse knelt in its harness. A pot of rice boiled over though no fire was lit. Something had entered the world, something ancient, and entirely new. He was named Siddhartha, which means he who achieves his aim. In his small face, those who looked closely saw both softness and strength, an ocean of stillness behind the movements of a child. He did not laugh more or cry less than other babies, but when he looked into your eyes, it felt as though he saw through the lifetimes you had forgotten. Queen Maya held him close, felt his heartbeat against her own, but in her heart she knew this child did not belong only to her. He belonged to the world. Word of the birth traveled quickly. When the child was only days old, the king summoned the wise sages of the land. Among them came Asita, an old hermit who lived in the mountains, wrapped in robes the color of ash, with eyes that had watched the turning of many seasons. He entered the palace slowly, carried no staff, asked no favor. He only asked to see the child. When Siddhartha was placed before him, Asita's lips trembled. Tears welled in his eyes, not from sorrow, but from recognition. He bowed low before the infant. And when he rose, he turned to the king. "This child will not rule a kingdom. He will rule the heart. He will not wield armies. He will end suffering. He is destined to become a Buddha, an awakened one. He will show the way beyond sorrow. But I will not live to see his teaching. That is my only sadness." And he bowed once more. The room fell still. Even the oil lamps seemed to lean closer. The king said nothing. The queen held her son more tightly. Maya did not live long after the birth. Some say it was her karma to return to the celestial realm, that to carry a Buddha is to carry a world, and some bodies are made only to hold such grace for a little while. Others say she became his guardian spirit, that she watched from beyond the veil, her presence in every breeze that cooled his fever, every bird that sang outside his window. Siddhartha was raised by her sister. He grew in the lap of comfort. But the memory of the grove, the trees, the moonlit dream, those lived on. Years later, when Siddhartha became the Buddha, he never spoke often of his birth. He taught of suffering, of the path, of breath, of impermanence. But once, when asked what it meant that he had walked on lotus blossoms, he smiled and said, The path was already beneath me. I did not make it appear. I only stepped where it had always been. Because truth is not invented, it is remembered. Like petals underfoot, waiting to be noticed. And so the child who walked on lotus blossoms became the man who taught others to walk in peace. One step, then another, until suffering too began to bloom into wisdom. It was still dark when the monk lit the kitchen fire. Outside, the mountain air clung to the stones like breath not yet exhaled. Frost kissed the corners of the monastery walls, and the wind had not yet stirred the bell. But inside, the kitchen was alive. The Tenzo, the head cook, moved with quiet care. He chopped vegetables with reverence, washed rice as though touching the Dharma, boiled water like preparing an offering to the unseen. Not because guests were coming, not because someone was watching, but because every movement was practice. In Zen monasteries, the Tenzo is not just a cook. He is a teacher, a practitioner, a guardian of presence. His role is not low, it is sacred, because Zen does not draw lines between spiritual and ordinary. It dissolves them, and what remains is just this moment. And this moment includes rice. The great Zen master Dogen once wrote a full text on this, instructions for the Tenzo. He said, "Do not treat cooking lightly. When you cook rice, wash your mind. When you slice roots, cut away delusion." He had learned this lesson young. When Dogen first arrived in China seeking true Dharma, he met an elderly Tenzo in a seaside monastery. The man was in his 60s, sun-worn, with sleeves rolled and hands deep in soaking beans. Dogen bowed respectfully. "Venerable one," he said, "why do you, at your age and rank, work in the kitchen?" The old monk looked up and said, "If not me, then who? And if not now, then when?" Dogen offered to help. The Tenzo smiled. "Thank you," he said, "but this is my practice." Later that day, Dogen saw the same monk drying mushrooms in the sun. He asked, "Why not do this tomorrow? The sun will rise again." The Tenzo simply said, "I do not wait for tomorrow's sun. My life is today." And in that moment, Dogen understood something deeper than scripture. That enlightenment is not found apart from daily life, but within it, in the steam rising from a pot, in the rhythm of chopping, in the patience of stirring porridge without haste. Years later, as a master, Dogen taught his students, when you cook, just cook. Don't think, I am cooking. Don't think, this is just food. Don't think, this is not meditation. Make every motion the expression of the way. In the monastery, the Tenzo bows before entering the kitchen. He arranges the knives, washes the board. He does not multitask. He does not rush. When he stirs everything. When he scrubs the pot, he scrubs the self. There is no low task, only low awareness. There is a koan that asks, "What is Buddha?" One master answered, 3 pounds of flax. Another said, "The rice cake on the shelf." Because Zen knows, the sacred hides in plain sight. Not above us, not beyond us, but within the ordinary, when seen without distraction. In modern life, we resist this. We see chores as interruptions, dishes as delays, errands as obstacles to real practice. But Zen asks, what if the very thing you're avoiding is your path? What if folding laundry is a bow? What if sweeping the floor is a blessing? What if cleaning the toilet is a teaching and letting go? The Tenzo is not trying to finish cooking. He is inhabiting it. With full presence, with full breath, with no need for applause, because practice is not what we do on the cushion, it is how we live off it. Dogen wrote, "See with your ears, hear with your eyes, prepare the food with your whole body-mind." Not poetry, not metaphor, instruction to become so present that the boundaries dissolve. To listen to the rice as it boils, to feel the carrot before slicing, to bow to the ladle before lifting it, because when we fully meet a moment, there is no self left to be enlightened. Only the moment, only the rice, only the breath. Once, a student complained, "Master, I have no time for meditation. I spend all day in the kitchen." The master asked, "Do you wash the rice?" "Yes." "Do you chop the greens?" "Yes." "Then why do you call that not meditating?" Commentary. Zen dismantles the hierarchy between sacred and mundane. It reminds us, you don't need incense to wake up. You don't need chants to be present. You need rice and a spoon, and the willingness to give yourself to both without resistance. If you're waiting for your life to get quieter before you practice, you may wait forever. But if you meet this moment, this task, as the way itself, then even the laundry becomes a sutra. Even the shopping list becomes a mantra. Even the broom becomes your teacher. The Tenzo is not just feeding bodies, he is cooking truth. And when the pot is washed, the ladle hung, and the kitchen swept, there is nothing left to attain, because it was never somewhere else. It was always here. In the steam, in the stillness, in the rhythm of this one breath. As our exploration of Zen Buddhism deepens, let us listen to a story that reveals how true worth is often overlooked. Here starts the next story. They worked for 7 days without rest. 4 monks, bent over low tables, hands steady, breath slow. Grain by grain, they placed colored sand onto a wide wooden platform, creating a mandala of breathtaking beauty. Circles inside circles, lotus petals, Buddhas seated in calm symmetry, tiny bridges crossing into sacred realms. It was more than art, it was a world. And they built it, knowing it would not last. Villagers came to watch, children gasped, old men wept. Even travelers paused on their way to market, drawn in by the silence, the precision, the colors blooming under careful fingers. Each night, the monks covered the mandala with a cloth. Each morning, they returned to their posture, like time itself had been paused. Not one grain out of place, not one breath wasted. On the 8th day, the abbot arrived. He walked around the mandala in silence, once, twice. Then he bowed and said only 4 words, "It is time now." One of the monks picked up a long white feather. He reached toward the center of the mandala and drew a single line through it. The design fractured instantly. A second stroke, then a third. The patterns dissolved. The colors blurred. What had taken a week to build unraveled in minutes, like a dream returning to mist. Some gasped, others cried, but the monks only bowed, then gathered the sand in a simple clay bowl. They walked together to the river. With a small prayer, they tipped the bowl, and the sand returned to water. color to flow, form to formlessness. Gone. This is the story of letting go, of beauty not owned, of effort not clung to, of creation not possessed. Commentary. The sand mandala is one of the clearest teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, not because of how it looks, but because of what happens after. In the West, we celebrate permanence. We build to last. We frame art. We publish books. We try to leave a legacy. But in Buddhism, there is no permanence, only appearance, only change, only flow. The monks poured their hearts into the mandala, their care, their breath, their presence. They built it not despite its impermanence, but because of it. They knew it would vanish, and they still gave everything. That is love without grasping, effort without ego, joy without needing to possess. The act of destroying the mandala is not cruelty, it is compassion, a reminder. Everything we cling to will one day dissolve. Beauty, youth, achievement, even memory. We can either mourn this endlessly or bow to it. There is a phrase in the Diamond Sutra. All conditioned things are like a dream, a phantom, a bubble, a shadow, like dew or a flash of lightning. Thus we shall view them. It doesn't mean nothing matters. It means everything matters more deeply when you know it's passing. You love your child's laughter more when you know they won't be 5 forever. You savour tea more when it's the last cup from the pot. You forgive faster when you realise tomorrow isn't promised. One woman who watched the mandala's destruction approached the abbot in tears. "All that work," she said, "and now it's gone." The abbot bowed. "That is why it was precious," he replied. "When we cling, we suffer. When we release, we flow." This doesn't mean becoming detached or cold. It means seeing clearly and trusting what passes. Trusting that even after the mandala is gone, the hands that built it are still steady. The breath that guided it is still with you. The river still carries the colors. Life is not meant to be grasped. It is meant to be given, again and again, like sand to a current. So build your mandalas, love your people, paint your days with color. But don't try to trap the moment. Let it come, let it shine, and when it's time, let it go. And perhaps, like the monks at the river, smile while you do. It is said there was once a monk who lived alone in a crumbling hut on the edge of a forgotten village. His robes were patched, his alms bowl was cracked. His sandals made no sound on the stone path. He spoke little, taught no students, carried no scrolls. But people said strange things happened when they met him. A merchant who had been cruel to his workers walked by the hut and wept for no reason. A mother carrying grief for her lost child said the monk looked at her once, and the grief melted into the wind. When asked what he taught, the villagers would shrug and say, "He says only this: there is light, even in darkness." The hidden light. It is one of the most mysterious and profound teachings in Mahayana Buddhism, because it does not promise that suffering will end quickly. It does not say life will be easy. It says only, there is something in you, deeper than pain, stronger than shame, more real than your confusion. It is called Buddha nature, and it exists in all beings. Not just the gentle ones, not just the wise ones, but also in the angry man gripping the bar, in the prisoner lying in silence, in the girl who cuts herself and hides the blade, in the addict, in the abuser, in the one we condemn. The light does not go out. It can be buried, forgotten, covered in ash, but never extinguished. There's a story in the Mahayana scriptures. A group of disciples sat with the Buddha and asked, "Master, does everyone have Buddha nature?" And the Buddha said, "Even this dog has it." The disciples frowned. The dog scratched, barked, chased shadows. But the Buddha saw beyond behavior. He saw the seed, the stillness beneath the noise, the jewel in the dirt. Imagine a gold statue wrapped in rags, sealed in clay, buried for centuries. No one knows it's there, but if you chip away the layers, the gold shines. That is the self, not something to create, something to uncover. We live in a world that measures worth by action. We say, prove you're good, show you're worthy, earn your place. But the Dharma says, you are already whole. Now act in a way that honors that. There's another story. A monk once asked a teacher, if everyone has Buddha nature, why do they act with greed and hatred? The teacher pointed to a clear pool. He picked up a stick and stirred the mud at the bottom. The water turned cloudy. Is the clarity gone? The teacher asked. No, said the monk. It's just hidden. Exactly, the teacher replied. Wait long enough and it will return. The path, then, is not about becoming something new. It is about becoming familiar with what has always been true. About seeing through the layers, not pushing them away, but noticing. This fear is a layer. This craving is a layer. This story I tell myself that I am broken, unworthy, lost, is a layer. And underneath, stillness, light. You. Some people fear this teaching. They say, if everyone has Buddha nature, what about evil? But Mahayana Buddhism does not excuse harm. It reveals the tragedy behind it. It says, this one too was once innocent. This one too has a light they forgot. This one too is capable of awakening. Not as an excuse, but as a possibility. When you see others through this lens, something shifts. The one who hurt you still hurt you. But now, they are more than that. You don't forgive because they deserve it. You forgive because you see clearly. Because you do not want your own light dimmed by hatred. Because you too want to be free. Commentary. To believe in Buddha nature is not to be naive. It is to have the deepest possible faith in what cannot be destroyed. Even by trauma, even by war, even by your own worst mistake. It is the faith that says, there is gold under the clay, even if I've forgotten it, even if no one else sees it, even if I don't yet know how to reach it. The monk in the crumbling hut. He had nothing, but he saw the light in everyone. And so people came, not to learn doctrine, but to be seen, to be reminded, to be held in the quiet truth that nothing in them was beyond repair. Maybe that's your task today, not to fix yourself, but to pause, to breathe, to ask, what if there's still light here? And then, to live from that place. Even if no one else understands. Even if the robe still feels heavy. Because the moment you remember, you become the reminder. A small boat drifted across the open sea. The waves rocked it gently. Clouds moved slowly above. Seabirds called from afar. but there was no land in sight. In the boat sat a lone traveller, bowl in lap, robes soft with salt air. He watched the sky reflect on the water and whispered the phrase he'd heard 100 times but never understood. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. These words come from the Heart Sutra, one of the most revered texts in Mahayana Buddhism. They are short, sharp, mysterious. They have been chanted in temples for centuries, painted on scrolls, whispered by monks, recited by dying lips. But what do they mean? How can something be both form and emptiness? Is it a riddle, a paradox, or a doorway? The traveller had once believed emptiness meant nothingness, that it was cold, silent, void. He tried to detach, to erase, to disappear. But the more he tried, the heavier he felt, because he still existed, still felt grief, still saw suffering in others and in himself. So he came to the ocean, not to escape, but to sit inside the question. The waves rose, fell. He dipped his fingers in the water. It clung for a moment, then slipped away. Form, emptiness, a wave, is not separate from the sea. It rises, appears, shines in the light, then dissolves. But it was never apart. It never existed in the way we imagine. It was always just movement, a form born from formlessness, a shape that could never be held. This is the meaning of emptiness. Shunyata in Sanskrit. It does not mean nothing. It means no fixed, independent existence, no solid boundary between self and world. Everything is interbeing, dependent, arising together. Your body is form, but where does it begin? At the skin. What about the breath entering your lungs? What about the warmth from the sun on your cheek? What about the smile passed to you by a stranger? Where do you end and the world begin? The more you look, the more it all dissolves into ocean. Form is emptiness. Everything you see is temporary, transient, unstable. But then, the second line, emptiness is form. This is the beauty. Emptiness is not barren. It appears as everything. The flower, the teacup, the child's laugh, the pain in your chest. All are expressions of emptiness, not meaningless, but miraculous, because they are here. Briefly, shining like dew before it falls. The traveller looked around the boat. Wood planks, salt crust, a loose nail near the bow, all temporary, all destined to decay. And yet, each part of the boat held him above the water. Emptiness had taken form, and that form mattered. It kept him afloat. There is a story from a monastery. A student asked the master, "If all is emptiness, why do we sweep the floor?" The master said, "Because the dust is also empty." Then handed him the broom. Emptiness does not deny suffering. It does not say your pain is an illusion. It says this pain is real, but not permanent. It arises and passes, like a wave, like a thought, like every tear that ever fell. Emptiness does not diminish life. It makes life possible. When you understand this, not just with mind, but with breath, you begin to live differently. You don't grasp as tightly. you don't fear change quite so much. You begin to see others not as objects, but as fleeting, radiant moments, not mine, not enemy, just waves, each one precious. The traveler reached into the ocean and lifted a handful of water. It shimmered, slipped through his fingers, gone. But the sea remained, and he smiled. Commentary. Form is emptiness. Emptiness is form. It is not meant to be solved. It is meant to be felt, to be returned to again and again, like a bell that rings across the years. Each time you hear it, you understand a little more. You are not a solid thing. You are movement, memory, dust and starlight. You are shaped by your parents, your fears, your laughter, your kindness. You are not fixed, but you are real, not because you are permanent, but because you are here. Now, the boat on the ocean is your life. It will not last, but while it floats, it can carry you. It can carry others. It can move with the waves, not fight them. And when it sinks, because all boats do, the sea will still be there. And you will return to it, not lost, but home. Continuing along the path of Zen insight, we pause now to hear a teaching about perception and hidden value. Listen carefully to the next story. A monk walked along a dusty trail, his robe fluttering slightly with each step. The morning air was clear, the sun warm but soft. A few birds called lazily from the treetops, but the monk's brow was furrowed. He had been sent to deliver a letter to a nearby monastery, and he was late. He had misread the schedule, taken the wrong turn, and now walked quickly, heart agitated beneath his robe. Each step struck the earth too hard. Each breath was shallow. His mind raced ahead. Will they think me careless? How could I have made such a mistake? I should have left earlier. What kind of monk forgets the path? Then he heard a voice behind him. Excuse me, Sir Monk. He turned to see a young boy, no older than 10, running up the path barefoot. He held something cupped in his palms. The monk paused. Yes? The boy stopped, panting, and held out his hands. Inside them sat a small, round pebble, no bigger than a thumbprint. It's beautiful, isn't it? The boy said. The monk looked down. It was smooth, flecked with tiny bits of crystal, glinting gently in the light. I found it near the stream, the boy said. It looked lonely. I thought maybe someone should notice. The monk smiled politely. That's kind of you. He began to turn away, but the boy looked up at him and said something that stopped him mid-step. Did you see any of the flowers you passed today? The monk blinked. What? The boy tilted his head. You've walked almost a mile. The path is full of little blue flowers, but your robe is dusty and your eyes are tight. You didn't see any of them, did you? The monk looked down at the pebble again. Then slowly, he sat on a flat rock at the side of the path. The boy grinned and plopped down beside him, offering the pebble again. And the monk, still holding the unopened letter, took it gently in his hand. This is the story of mindfulness in ordinary things. Commentary. In Zen, we often speak of awakening as though it is some great flash of light or a sudden shift in consciousness. But often, awakening is small, like noticing a flower you've walked past for weeks, or hearing the sound of your own breath after a hard day. or holding a pebble that simply is. The monk had been walking as if his destination were the only thing that mattered. His hurry had made him blind. Not because he lacked wisdom, but because he had left the present moment behind in favor of imagined shame and future apologies. The boy, with no training and no robe, was more awake than he, not because he had studied sutras, but because he saw what was in front of him, and he shared it. There's a Zen phrase: the miracle is not to walk on water, but to walk on the earth. The monk delivered the letter later that day, but he took a different path back, slower, softer. He paused to notice the flowers the boy had spoken of, tiny blossoms with indigo petals, scattered like spilled paint across the roadside. He bowed to them, then reached into his robe and touched the small pebble still in his sleeve. After that, he kept it on the windowsill beside his mat, not as a relic, but as a reminder that awareness begins not with enlightenment, but with noticing what's already here. We spend our lives waiting for bigger signs, bigger truths, more impressive moments. But the sacred is everywhere, in the weight of a spoon, the hush of dusk, the rhythm of footsteps, the coolness of a cup before tea is poured. The boy in the story grew up. He never became a monk. But he taught his children to pause, to touch the bark of trees, to look into puddles after rain, to name the colors of the sky at sunset. And his children did the same. Sometimes the greatest teachers do not stand at the front of a hall. They kneel by a stream and lift a stone. So let the pebble teach you. Let it slow you down. Let it whisper, "This moment matters too." The monk sat alone in the temple courtyard. The wind moved gently through the pines, stirring fallen needles on the stone path. A bell rang in the distance, soft, fading, until the silence returned like a breath held still. It was here, beneath a slanted wooden roof and beside a moss-covered wall, that the question first came. What is the sound of one hand clapping? It was not a riddle, not meant to be solved like a puzzle. It was a koan, spoken not to explain truth, but to unseat the mind that demands explanation. The student who received it was young. His name is not remembered, not because he was unworthy, but because names cling to form, and this teaching pointed beyond. He bowed low to the old master who had given it to him. "Sensei," he said quietly, "I will meditate on it." The master nodded but said no more, and the student went out into the world, not to escape, but to listen more deeply. At first he tried to reason. He sat in the zendo, legs crossed, breath measured, mind tight. He clapped with one hand against the wall. He slapped his thigh. He waved his palm in the air. None of it answered the question. Frustration crept in. "This is foolish," he muttered. But the question remained, not like a stone blocking a path, but like a wind behind him that would not stop. "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" He spoke to other monks. One said, "It is silence." Another said, "It is the absence of duality." A third just laughed and walked away. The student grew weary, but one morning, while sweeping the courtyard with a worn broom, he stopped. The breeze brushed against his robe. The crow called out from the roof beam, and something softened. He had been trying to answer the question, but the koan was not asking for words. It was asking him to see. Long ago, during the Tang dynasty in China, a great Zen master named Hakuju taught in a small mountain temple above the rice terraces. His students came from far and wide, some nobles, some peasants, all seekers. One day, a scholar arrived, well dressed and full of knowledge. "I have read the sutras," he said, bowing. "I have studied philosophy. Now I wish to understand Zen." Hakuju nodded once and poured him tea. The cup filled, then overflowed. The scholar pulled back. "Master, the cup is full." "Yes," said Hakuju, "and so are you." The scholar blinked. "How can I show you Zen?" Hakuju asked, "if your mind is already spilling over with answers?" The scholar was silent. In Zen, emptiness is not a lack, it is readiness, not void, but space. And koans are not doors to be unlocked, but mirrors held up to the part of you that cannot be named. Back in the modern temple, the young monk was told by his master, "Take this koan with you." So he left the walls of the monastery and walked for days. He sat by rivers. He listened to windmills. He watched farmers plant rice. Hands sunk in the mud, like prayers returned to the earth. In the clatter of chopsticks. In the rustle of robes. In the space between footfalls and breath. He waited to hear it, the sound of one hand clapping. Years passed. Once, he returned to the master and said, "It must be silence." The master shook his head. Another time he said, "It is everything." The master only smiled. "Keep listening," he said. In a village by the sea, the monk took up work as a fisherman, not to abandon the path, but to live it. He cast his net into the morning fog, watched the sky blush with daybreak, and learned the rhythm of waves as if it were a chant. One evening, a boy approached him on the beach. "Are you a monk?" the boy asked. "I was," he said. "Do you still pray?" The monk nodded. "Yes, but not with words." The boy sat beside him. They watched the tide pull back the shells and kelp and memory. After a long while, the boy whispered, "What are you listening for?" The monk smiled. He held up his open hand. "Nothing," he said, "and everything." Back in the temple, the master grew old. He no longer walked the garden path alone. Students brought him water, prepared his meals, folded his robes. One day, he called for his disciple, the young monk who was no longer young. They sat together beneath the pine beams. "Do you hear it?" the master asked. The disciple nodded. There was no sound, and yet the crows, the wind, the silence itself, all echoed a truth beyond sound and silence. The master reached out and gently placed his palm against the disciple's chest. "Not here," he said, touching his head, "but here." And then he laughed, deep, full, warm as firelight. In Zen, the sound of one hand clapping is not meant to be heard with ears. It is the sound of the mind giving up its struggle, the sound of the ego ceasing to divide. It is not a trick, it is an invitation to let go of the need to name, to release the grip that separates this from that, self from other, sound from silence. Years later, the disciple became a teacher. A student asked him, "What is the sound of one hand clapping?" And the teacher did not answer with words. He picked up a broom and swept the courtyard. He poured tea for his student. He sat, he waited. And the student listened. Zen does not aim to explain. It invites you to experience, to sit still enough that the need to explain dissolves. The sound of one hand clapping is not something you hear. It is something you become when you drop the illusion that there are two hands to begin with. No answer can give you that. Only awareness, only presence, only the quiet bravery to not know. And in that not knowing, you just might begin to hear. At the edge of a quiet village stood a grove of bamboo. Tall, slender, green like fresh thought. Children played between the stalks. Lovers carved initials in their husks. The wind passed through them like a flute, and they bent, bowed, never snapped. Even in the worst monsoons, when roofs were torn and trees cracked in two, the bamboo always remained, not by resisting, but by yielding. The villagers took comfort in them, the way they swayed without fear, the way they seemed to whisper, "It is okay to move with what comes." One year, a powerful storm swept through the valley, the kind that arrives with no warning, just a sudden hush, then a roar like sky breaking. Palm trees were flung sideways. The great banyan lost a limb, crops flattened, roofs lifted like paper, and yet, in the morning light, the bamboo still stood, drenched, bent, but alive. An old monk named Tenzin watched from his hut on the hill. After the storm passed, he gathered his students and led them to the grove. He said nothing at first, just stood beside the bamboo. One student broke the silence. "Master, how did these survive?" Tenzin smiled. "The bamboo," he said, "has no pride in its strength, only trust in its roots, and the wisdom to bend." Another student frowned. "But isn't bending the same as giving in?" Tenzin tapped one stalk gently with his hand. "Does this feel weak to you?" The bamboo swayed slightly, not from impact, just from being what it is. "No," he continued, "bending is not defeat. It is relationship. To wind, to time, to life, to understand that resisting everything is how things break." The students were quiet. Tenzin knelt beside one stalk, pressed his hand to the wet earth. "There is a lesson here," he said softly. "The strong oak is proud until lightning splits it. The mountain stands tall until earthquake shakes it. But the bamboo, it lives by letting go of control. It knows the storm will not ask permission, so it dances instead of breaking." Later that week, a young woman in the village fell ill. Severe, sudden. The doctor said it would be weeks before she could walk again. She was bitter, frustrated. Tenzin visited her, sat beside her without judgment. And after a long silence, he said, "You're in a storm now. You cannot control the wind, but you can soften. Not give up, just give in. To healing, to stillness, to time." She cried, and in that surrender, healing began. Months passed, the village rebuilt. The trees grew back slowly, but the bamboo never changed much. It didn't need to, because it had already learned what others forgot, that survival is not always about standing firm. Sometimes it's about moving with grace. There is a line in a Zen poem: "Be like bamboo, deep-rooted, open-jointed, hollow-hearted. What bends does not break, what yields is not weak, and what allows itself to sway teaches us what it means to stay." As we drift deeper into the still waters of Zen, a quiet teaching begins to rise, one that speaks of clarity and of value not always seen. Listen gently now. The next story begins. There was once a dog who barked at everything: leaves in the wind, a child's laughter, the moon. He lived near the edge of a monastery in the countryside, a dusty patch of land behind the kitchen where scraps were tossed and shadows flickered on old stone walls. The monks called him Naga. No one knew where he came from. He was just always there, tail curled, eyes sharp, teeth ready, and always barking. When visitors arrived, he barked. When bells rang, he barked. Even when nothing moved at all, he barked, as if the world itself was suspicious. Some monks avoided him. "Too wild," they muttered. Others threw him bread or whispered mantras for his restless soul. But one monk, elderly, slow-moving, soft-spoken, began to sit near him each morning. No words, no food, just presence. He would settle into the grass, cross-legged, a few paces from Naga's resting place. He didn't reach for him, didn't scold the barking. He just sat. At first, Naga barked at him too, low growls, sharp yelps, but the monk remained still, breathing in, breathing out, no threat, no fear, no reaction. Days passed, then weeks. Naga still barked at others, still snarled at passing carts or fluttering robes, but not at the old monk. Eventually, when the monk arrived, Naga would simply lift his head and then rest it again. One morning, the monk placed a small bowl of water nearby. Naga didn't touch it, not for an hour, but as the sun climbed, he finally approached, drank, then sat beside the bowl. The monk said nothing, only smiled. A younger monk watching from the corridor asked later, "Master, how did you calm him? We've tried so many things, food, scolding, chants." The old monk replied, "He barked because the world barked back. He expected resistance, but when he found none, he started listening." Reactivity, the monk would later teach, is like a match near dry grass. One spark, and the fire spreads. But if the grass is damp, soft, grounded, the flame fizzles out. Naga still barked sometimes, but not with the same edge, not with the same fear. And when the old monk passed away years later, Naga lay beside his meditation cushion for 3 days, silent, not whimpering, not barking, just there. Monks and novices alike noticed. A dog who once barked at everything, now holding space for grief, with the stillness of a cloud. There is a saying, when you stop reacting, you start seeing. The dog had seen the one thing no command could teach, that peace isn't taught through force, but through presence that does not flinch. She had heard hundreds of stories, pain layered on pain, grief knotted with shame, rage disguised as silence. Dr. Anjali Mehta was a seasoned therapist, 47 years old, calm voice, warm eyes, a room filled with soft lamps, quiet bookshelves, and a single blue armchair that caught the afternoon light just so. She had learned, over time, that her work was not to fix people, but to witness them, to hold space, to wait, to not flinch when the truth arrived. That afternoon, her 2 p.m. client sat stiffly, teenage boy, 17, sleeves pulled over his hands, a stare that hovered somewhere behind her shoulder. He didn't speak for the first 8 minutes. She didn't force it. She just sat, breathing gently, grounded, present. When he finally did speak, it was one sentence. "Everyone talks like they know what I'm feeling. They don't." She didn't nod too quickly, didn't say, "I understand." Instead, she let silence do what words often can't. "There's a saying in Zen," she offered softly, "that the teacher is like a mirror. They don't speak for you. They just show you where the dust has gathered." The boy blinked, looked at her, and, for the first time in weeks, said something more. There is a deep wisdom in the pause, the moment between a question and an answer, the breath between emotion and reaction, the silence that honors pain without trying to patch it. Anjali once had a mentor who said, "You don't need the right words, you need the right presence." She had taken that to heart. Her patients didn't always thank her, didn't always improve quickly, but many came back. Because there aren't many places in the world where someone will sit with your brokenness without trying to sweep it away. She remembered an older woman once, widowed after 42 years. The woman cried for 45 minutes straight. Anjali didn't interrupt, didn't analyze, just handed her a tissue and stayed. At the end of the session, the woman whispered, "You're the only person who didn't tell me to be strong." Anjali said nothing, but later she wept, not from sadness, but from the honor of witnessing someone's unguarded truth. Therapists are trained to listen, but Anjali had learned to listen beneath the words, the tightening of a jaw, the hesitation before a name, the breath that catches after, "I'm fine." Sometimes her job wasn't to provide answers. It was to be the room where the storm could pass. She had a small bell on her desk, never rang it, just kept it there to remind herself, return to this moment, over and over. One evening, after a long day, she wrote in her journal, "People come in with tangled lives. I don't untangle them, I just hold the threads until they can begin to see the pattern." The boy in the blue hoodie came back the next week, and the next. He still didn't say much, but he sat and listened, and didn't flinch when she said his name. It was a start. And sometimes, that is enough. A monk once asked his teacher, "Master, where does the path to enlightenment begin?" The teacher did not answer. Instead, he stood up, walked across the room, and swept the floor. Later that night, the monk asked again, "Then where does it end?" The teacher looked up from pouring tea and said, "If it ends, it was never the way." This is the story of non-arrival, the path that unfolds not to get somewhere, but to be fully where you are. Long ago, in a forest monastery, a wandering monk arrived seeking answers. He had studied every scripture, debated with scholars, and meditated in caves for years. And yet, he felt restless, incomplete, as if truth always lived just beyond the next bend. He bowed to the abbot and said, "I have walked many roads. I seek the one that leads to awakening." The abbot nodded and replied, Very well. Walk with me tomorrow at dawn. The next morning, they walked. Through bamboo groves, past quiet ponds, up rocky trails where mist clung to the earth like breath. They walked all day. The monk said little. By dusk, they had returned to where they started. The monk frowned. "You promised to show me the path." The abbot said, "I did. We walked it." The monk blinked. "But we arrived nowhere." The abbot smiled. "Exactly." The student wanted something linear, a goal, a peak. A moment where the sky split open and declared, "Here it is." But the Dharma is not a destination. It is the walking itself. It is the attention you give to each step, the space between one breath and the next. The Buddha did not climb a holy mountain to reach truth. He sat under a tree and stopped seeking. You do not become awake like winning a race. You remember the truth that was always here. Under the hurry, beneath the striving, inside the stillness of the now. When we think of progress, we think forward. Farther, better, beyond. But what if the path moves deeper, not farther? Inward, not onward. Like returning to the place you began, but seeing it clearly for the first time. The monk eventually understood. He stopped chasing high teachings, stopped measuring his worth by distance traveled. He began to walk slowly. He bowed to doorways, thanked his bowl before eating, washed his feet with care, and in those simple moments, something softened, something opened. There's a Zen saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The tasks do not change, but the one doing them no longer seeks to arrive. He is already home. In the end, the way is not mystical. It is making tea without rushing. It is folding robes with full attention. It is greeting the morning with breath instead of thought. And in those everyday movements, the path walks itself. The old abbot left behind a note before his passing. It read, "Those who hurry are carried by illusion. Those who walk with it vanish into the way." The monk later became a teacher. When asked by a student, "Where is the path?" he would only point at the floor beneath their feet. "Here," he'd say. "Now walk." So if you are still searching, still waiting to feel worthy, enlightened, or arrived, pause. Notice your breath. Feel your weight on the earth. Let this moment be enough, because the greatest truth, there is nowhere to get to, and still, you walk. With each breath, we continue our journey through the wisdom of Zen, where the smallest stone may hold the greatest truth. Here starts the next story. It was a quiet station. Old stone, metal benches, pigeons pacing like monks in mourning robes. The arrivals board flickered. The loudspeaker crackled, and trains came and went, their breath hissing across the platform like tired beasts. Every day just before noon, an old man would arrive. He wore a flat cap, pressed slacks, a wool coat that had seen better winters. He never boarded. He never greeted anyone. He simply sat. Same bench, same hour, same stillness. At first, people thought he was waiting for someone. A son, a daughter, a wife who might never arrive. They glanced at him with quiet sympathy or soft dismissal, but the days passed. Then weeks, and he was always there, alone, unbothered, still. One day, a young woman sat beside him. She was holding a phone in one hand, tapping constantly, half listening to music in the other ear. She kept checking the time, fidgeting, breathing shallow. The old man looked out at the tracks, unmoving. After a while, she said, almost without looking, "Who are you waiting for?" He smiled. "Nothing." She blinked. "Then why are you here?" He paused, then nodded toward the platform. To wait. This is the story of presence, of sitting in stillness with no outcome, no expectation, and no rush. Commentary. The world runs on arrival. We hurry to meetings, chase after goals, measure our worth by progress, but in the Dharma, there is no arrival, only presence. The old man wasn't avoiding life. He was stepping into it, minute by minute, footstep by breath, like a bell that rings just once, not to announce anything, but because it can. At first, the young woman scoffed. She muttered, "That's kind of pointless." The old man nodded. Yes, and peaceful. She paused, looked at him fully for the first time. There was something settled in his face, not detached, just done chasing. He didn't ask her what she did for work, didn't comment on the news, didn't offer advice. He just sat and breathed. The train came. She didn't get on. Instead, she silenced her music, turned off her phone, sat beside him. They shared the silence for half an hour. It was the first silence she'd had in weeks. The Buddha once said, "Better than 1,000 hollow words is one word that brings peace." The old man said none, and yet peace lingered around him like perfume. He came every day, even in the rain, umbrella in hand, thermos of tea, soft eyes and unhurried limbs. He didn't come to do anything. He came to stop doing. We often misunderstand waiting. We think it's the pause before real life. But sometimes, waiting is life, not for something, but with it. Eventually, the young woman started visiting more often. She brought tea, sat on the same bench, and didn't speak, until one day she asked, "What if the person you were waiting for never comes?" The old man looked at her with a calm smile. "Then I'll still be here." That's the power of presence. It doesn't depend on outcome. It doesn't beg for fulfillment. It simply is. In time, others noticed. A mother sat for 5 quiet minutes with her son. A commuter took off his headphones. A woman reading poetry closed her book and just watched the clouds drift. No one spoke, but something was shifting. Not loudly, not suddenly, like morning fog lifting, unnoticed. And then, one spring day, the old man stopped coming. His bench stayed empty, but the silence remained. So did the stillness, and the space he had created. By doing nothing, expecting nothing, needing nothing. Wasn't empty, it was full of something rare. Peace. The young woman still visits the bench, not daily, not ritually, just when the world starts rushing too fast. She sits, breathes, smiles at passing trains, and once when a man sat beside her and asked, "Who are you waiting for?" she answered, "No one," then added, "I'm just here, in the heart of the city of Vaishali, Not far from the clamor of markets and the perfume of jasmine, there lived a man unlike any other. He was wealthy, yes. His robes dyed in saffron and silk, his estate wide as a lake. He was respected, known to governors and scholars alike. He was a householder, a father, a merchant. But more than that, he was awake. His name was Vimalakirti. Unlike the monks, he did not wear simple robes. Unlike the ascetics, he did not live in the forest. He lived in the world, but not of it. He walked through noise with the silent mind. He moved through illusion without being caught. And so his teachings were sharper than sermons, his presence more disruptive than thunder. One day, it was said that Vimalakirti had fallen ill, not from weakness, but from compassion. He had taken on the sickness of the world so others might awaken. Word reached the Buddha and his disciples, so the Buddha asked, "Who will go and visit the ailing Vimalakirti?" One by one, the great disciples declined. Shariputra, Maudgalyayana, Ananda. Each said, "Master, I cannot. I have debated Vimalakirti before, and I was humbled." Because this layman, this non-monk, non-official, had a clarity that even the great arhats could not match. His words undid your logic. His questions pierced through pride. He was kind, but unshakably sharp. At last the Buddha turned to Manjushri, the bodhisattva of wisdom, and Manjushri, without hesitation, said, "I will go." So Manjushri entered the city, accompanied by heavenly beings, monks and devas. He found Vimalakirti reclining on a simple bed beneath a flowering tree. His eyes were calm, his illness invisible, his presence unmistakable. Manjushri bowed. "Venerable one," he said, "how should a bodhisattva view the world?" A simple question. And Vimalakirti answered not with poetry, but with paradox. A bodhisattva views the world as a magician views an illusion, as a dream, as a mirage, as a bubble on water. Manjushri asked again, "What is the root of this illness?" Vimalakirti replied, "The root of my sickness is the sickness of all beings. When they are healed, I will be healed too." And then he began to teach, not with lectures, but with reversals. He said a bodhisattva must live in the world without being trapped by it, must speak without attachment to words, must enter duality in order to transcend it. His home became a Dharma hall, his bed a throne of emptiness. Then came the final deepest question. Manjushri asked, "What is the ultimate teaching of non-duality?" One by one, the assembled bodhisattvas gave answers, each profound, each poetic. They spoke of emptiness, of no birth and no death, of neither here nor there, of neither self nor other. Each spoke in turn, until all had spoken. Then they turned to Vimalakirti and asked, "What is your answer?" Vimalakirti looked at them, smiled and said, "Nothing." He remained completely silent. No gesture, no word, just presence. And in that moment, the hall fell still. Even the wind paused at the edge of the window. And the bodhisattvas understood, because that, his silence, was the answer. Beyond yes and no, beyond concepts, beyond even the word beyond, only direct knowing, unspoken and complete. Commentary. The Vimalakirti Sutra is not just a scripture, it is a mirror, held up to the part of us that clings to roles, to robes, to rank, to rhetoric. It reminds us, wisdom is not a matter of appearance, and truth is not always spoken. Vimalakirti was not a monk, but he understood Dharma more deeply than most. He owned property, but was not owned by it. He lived among crowds, but dwelled in emptiness. He used language, but was not trapped by it. And when the time came to speak of non-duality, he let silence do the speaking. Sometimes, silence is escape. But sometimes, it is clarity, not a refusal, but a revelation. A silence so full, it says everything. There's a Zen saying, when the mouth is closed, the Dharma speaks most clearly. This is what Vimalakirti embodied, the wordless transmission, the truth beyond fingers pointing to moons. In our world, we often rush to speak, to fill the space, to define, to prove. But Vimalakirti teaches, when we stop grasping, when we stop arranging words like armor, what remains is presence. The silence was not empty, it was alive. It was not passive, it was the roar of no self. It dismantled even the idea of someone giving an answer, and left only this. You don't have to be a monk to wake up. You don't have to renounce your life. You have to see through it, and then live with depth, with clarity, with compassion, from within the illusion, while no longer fooled by it. Vimalakirti's room is still here. Every moment you stop trying to win the argument. Every time you stop needing to prove you're wise. Every time you rest in the space before thought, you are sitting beside him, and you are silent too. One morning, as the temple bell echoed over the hills, a feather drifted across the gravel path. Software white, weightless. It twisted in the breeze, rising, falling, then gliding gently down near the feet of an old monk named Shiro. He stopped mid-step, not because the feather blocked his way, but because he had learned that even the smallest interruption might carry a lesson. He bent down, lifted it with 2 fingers, and held it up to the light. It was a simple thing, delicate, almost nothing, and yet it had travelled from some distant bird, perhaps one flying over the valley, or shaken loose in a morning preen. It had no wings, no voice, no will, yet here it was, resting, present, carried. That day during tea, Shiro spoke to the novices. He placed the feather on the center of the table. "Is this free?" he asked. The youngest tilted his head. "It floats on the wind, so..." "Yes?" Another frowned. "But it goes wherever the wind takes it. That's not freedom, it's powerlessness." A third sipped her tea and said nothing. Shiro smiled. "All 3 of you are correct," he said, "depending on how you define freedom." He continued, "Most people think freedom means control, to choose, to decide, to resist what moves us." He looked out the open window. But the feather has no resistance, no plan, and yet it dances. The novices leaned in. He pointed toward the sky. If the wind blew north, it went north. If the wind changed, so did the feather. But never once did it say, "I failed." There was a pause. One novice finally asked, "Then what is the lesson, Master?" Shiro replied softly, "There are times to steer and times to yield." He picked up the feather again. True freedom is not always in direction, but in the way we ride the currents. Later that week, the temple cat fell ill. The novices fretted. One cried. Another tried to feed it broth. But Shiro simply sat beside it. He offered no solutions, no prayers, only presence. When the cat passed, Shiro gathered the novices. He did not speak of death, only of the wind. "You cannot hold the wind in your hands," he said, "but you can feel its path against your face." He paused. "And when it carries something away, you do not curse the air. You bow to its rhythm." The novices returned to their chores, softer now, quieter, less frantic in their attempts to fix what could not be fixed. One afternoon, as a storm gathered, a gust swept through the open courtyard. A lone feather rose from the steps, twirled, and vanished over the garden wall. Shiro saw it, smiled. He whispered, "Carried, yet free." There's a saying in Chan Buddhism: "The bird leaves no tracks in the sky. The wind leaves no footprints in the grass." The feather, like the mind, is most graceful when it stops fighting where it's going. The path of Zen unfolds like morning mist, soft and patient. In this next tale, we are invited to see, beyond appearance, into essence. Listen carefully to the next story. The banks of the Ganges shimmered with morning light. Mist curled like white breath from the earth, and birds traced wide arcs above the water. The river flowed as it always had, unhurried, ancient, indifferent. Upon a small rise near the city of Gaya, the Buddha stood. His saffron robes caught the first golden threads of sunlight, and his presence seemed to quiet even the wind. Around him gathered 1,000 ascetics, silent, weathered, lean with years of discipline. Their robes were coarse, their skin bronzed by fire and wind. Their eyes held questions that words could not form. They had come to hear him, not because he promised liberation, but because he had found it. These were men who had walked barefoot on burning sand, who had held their breath until stars blurred in their vision, who had fasted until even hunger grew silent. They had known pain. They had studied sacred fire. They had chanted, scarred, endured. But they had not known peace. And so they came, not to challenge, but to listen. The Buddha began not with praise, nor with rules, nor with doctrine. He began with fire. "All is burning," he said. A ripple moved through the crowd like wind across tall grass. He paused, let the silence stretch, like the space between flames. "All is burning," he repeated. "The I is burning. Forms are burning. I consciousness is burning." He spoke slowly, deliberately, each word striking like a drumbeat in the still morning air. Burning with what? With the fire of lust, the fire of hatred, the fire of delusion? Some closed their eyes, others frowned. A few leaned forward, their breaths caught. The Buddha looked upon them, not with challenge, but with compassion. "This body you cling to," he said, "it is a wick. This mind you chase through craving, a spark. And each time you grasp, Each time you say, mine, you feed the fire. A breeze moved across the Ganges. It stirred the edges of robes. It cooled nothing. The Buddha continued. The world is ablaze, but not with wood and coal. It burns with longing, with grasping, with thirst. He walked slowly among them, not above, not apart. His steps made no sound. Eyes that chase beauty, ears that crave praise, tongues that seek sweetness, minds that hunger for permanence. He turned and lifted his simple alms bowl. This too is not mine. It holds food today. Tomorrow, it may be empty. I thank it either way. From the back, an old ascetic raised his hand. Are we to abandon joy? He asked. Is not joy the goal? The Buddha smiled faintly. No, he said. Not joy. Only the craving for joy. Let joy arise. Let it come like wind through trees. But do not chase it. Do not bind to it. Do not say, this is mine. For the flame you grasp will burn your hand. Another monk asked quietly, how do we live in a burning world? The Buddha looked at him with eyes deep as a still lake. Like a man who sees the blaze, he said. Who walks with care, breathes with wisdom, and holds no illusion that the fire is shelter. A hush fell over the gathering, not from fear, but from recognition. The fire was not only in the cities, or in war, or in anger. It was inside them, inside each grasping thought, each clenched desire. The Buddha sat upon the earth. He drew a circle in the dust with his finger. Inside this circle, he said, are your perceptions, your feelings, your ideas. They rise like smoke. They change like flame. They disappear like ash. Do not build your home in a fire. A younger monk, no more than 20 summers old, whispered, then where do we dwell, Master? The Buddha looked up. In awareness, he said. In equanimity. In the space between sparks. Be the witness, not the fuel. The monks bowed their heads. Some wept, not from sorrow, but from something else. From release, from clarity, from the sudden lightness of realizing they could put something down. That night, they built no fires. There were no chants, no ceremonies. They ate simply, drank river water, and sat in silence. But the silence was not empty. It was watchful. Each monk sat with his own flickering flame. Some remembered the pain of hunger they had forced upon themselves. Others remembered the pride they had felt when praised for discipline. Some saw anger they had not named, others grief, and they did not suppress these fires. They simply watched. And in the watching, something shifted. Not extinguished, but no longer fed. In the days that followed, the change was quiet but real. Monks who had once worshipped sacred flame, who had walked barefoot on coals, branded their skin, sat in the sun for days, now turned to a gentler discipline. They practiced release. They rose with the sun. They swept the courtyard slowly. They bowed not to fire, but to understanding. When visitors asked them what the Buddha had taught that morning, they did not recite scriptures. They did not speak of rebirth or karma or cosmology. They said only, "He showed us the fire and told us we did not have to live in it." The fire sermon was spoken many times across the years, but none more powerful than that first morning on the river bank, when the smoke from the city's cooking fires curled upward, mirroring the craving in every heart, and the Buddha, with nothing in his hands and peace in his gaze, simply said, "Let it burn, let it pass, and do not be consumed." The scholar arrived at the mountain temple with a scroll under one arm and confidence in his step. He had studied the texts. He had debated sutras with masters across the provinces. He had published writings on logic and perception, emptiness and form. And now, at last, he wished to learn Zen. He was met by the abbot, an old man with tired eyes and steady hands. They sat on floor cushions beneath a wooden beam. The room smelled of old cedar and rain-damp stone. Outside, the wind stirred the pine needles. The abbot said nothing. The scholar bowed. "I have come to learn the true meaning of Zen." The abbot smiled and reached for the teapot. He poured and kept pouring. The cup filled, then overflowed. The tea spilled onto the tray, then the floor, pooling around the scholar's sleeve. "Master!" the scholar cried, pulling back. "The cup is full! No more will go in!" The abbot paused, then looked up, expression unchanged. "Exactly," he said. "If your cup is already full, how can I show you Zen?" That was the lesson. No parable, no verse, no philosophy, just tea and the quiet sound of too much. In Zen, this story is often the first told, because so many who come to the practice do so with answers already in hand. Certainties, systems, names for things that have no names. But Zen is not a path of addition. It is a path of subtraction, not filling up, but emptying out, so that what cannot be spoken can finally be seen. Later that evening, the scholar sat alone in the courtyard. The wind had shifted. The trees swayed like old dancers in the dark. He touched the wet sleeve of his robe, still stained from the spilled tea. He thought of how much effort he had made, years of memorizing, comparing, analyzing. And now, a cup of tea had undone him. The next morning, he returned to the abbot. He bowed deeper this time. "I will begin again," he said, "but this time, I will begin with an empty cup." The abbot simply nodded and poured. In the West, we're taught to value accumulation, of knowledge, of opinions, of success. We believe wisdom is something gained, a kind of mental wealth, stacked neatly in rows. But in Zen, true seeing begins only when the shelves collapse, when we stop trying to name the wind and instead feel it on our skin. The story of the teacup is not just about humility, it's about presence, because most of us don't realize how full we are, not with wisdom, but with noise. Thoughts, fears, comparisons, labels for ourselves, judgments of others. Memories clinging like moss to the walls of the mind, and into that already crowded room, we try to invite truth. But truth is shy. It doesn't enter noise. It waits for silence. Once, a monk asked his teacher, "What is the essence of Zen?" The teacher picked up a broom and began sweeping, not as metaphor, but as truth. The monk blinked. "I meant the true essence." The teacher stopped, held up the broom, and said, "When your cup is empty enough to see this, then you'll know." The scholar stayed at the temple. He chopped wood, carried water, swept the garden path. he stopped trying to explain Zen and began living it. When thoughts rose, he bowed to them like old friends. When the wind blew, he listened. He stopped speaking about emptiness in essays and began to taste it in his bones. One afternoon, while washing bowls, another visitor arrived, a young academic from the capital, eager, brilliant, hungry for answers. He asked the abbot, "Master, what is Zen?" The abbot reached for the teapot. The scholar, now older and humbler, smiled gently and whispered under his breath, "Careful, your cup is already full." Commentary. We often think that wisdom means knowing more. But in Zen, wisdom is the art of unknowing, not ignorance, but freedom from the clutter of should and must, from the heavy robes of "I already know." To be empty is not to be void, it is to be receptive, to hold space for what arises, without grabbing it, without turning it into a theory. A teacup holds tea because it is empty. A mind holds peace because it is still. You cannot pour into what is already overflowing. You cannot meet truth if you are busy rehearsing your opinions. Zen is not an addition to your bookshelf. It is the moment you set the bookshelf on fire and warm your hands by the flames. There is a cup in all of us. Sometimes it's filled with pride, sometimes with fear, sometimes with knowledge we mistake for awakening. But when you're ready, when you truly long for clarity, you will tip that cup, let it spill, and then, and only then, will the tea of the present moment finally be poured. In a quiet village nestled between two rivers, a potter lived alone. He was known not for his words, but for his hands. They shaped the earth with kindness. They moved with rhythm, like a prayer. And every morning before the sun rose, he would mold the same thing, small clay lamps, hundreds of them. He did not sell them. He did not sign them. He left them at doorsteps before dawn, filled with oil, a simple wick resting inside. By evening, the lamps would flicker to life, soft amber lights glowing in windows and shrines, guiding travelers, warming meals, lighting prayers. And no one knew where they came from, only that they came quietly. One day, a monk came to the village. He had heard of this lamp ghost and was curious. He waited outside a hut, said to belong to the potter, and watched the sun rise. Sure enough, the door creaked open. A thin man stepped out, carrying a worn wooden tray of unbaked lamps. He didn't see the monk at first, so the monk bowed and said gently, "Friend, why do you do this?" The potter paused. He looked down at the lamps, then up at the sky just beginning to lighten, and replied, "Because one day I won't be here, but maybe the light will." This is the story of karma and legacy, how what we give quietly endures beyond our body. Commentary. Many people worry about what will remain of them. They build statues, they write books, they name buildings after themselves. But the deepest echoes are often unmarked, like a clay lamp on a doorstep, lit by someone you never met, burning because of your offering. The potter never asked who lit the lamps, never watched them flicker at dusk, never demanded thanks. He just shaped the earth, filled it with light, and left it for the world to use. This is karma in its most graceful form. Not reward, not punishment, but continuation. The Buddha once said, "Just as a candle lights another and can light thousands, so the light of one heart can illuminate countless others. We are clay, yes, but we are also the fire. And when this form ends, what burns inside us doesn't disappear. It moves on through kindness passed on, through wisdom shared, through care planted in another's path. The potter died in the winter of his 79th year. He died quietly at home, his hands still stained with red earth. When villagers found him, his workshop was filled with unbaked lamps, dozens of them, lined up like soldiers of light, waiting for dawn. They were fired in his honor and distributed across the village. But something strange began to happen. Even after the lamps ran out, more began to appear. Not always the same shape, not always the same clay, but always filled with oil and always left before sunrise. Because a child who had once lit one of his lamps remembered the warmth and made one, then another, then taught a neighbor, and the fire moved on. This is rebirth, not in form, but in impact. You do not need to be remembered, you only need to leave light behind. So ask yourself, what lamps are you shaping? What small lights are you leaving in the world? Not to be praised, but to be used. Because one day, your body will rest. But your lamp may still burn in a window you never saw. In the hush of understanding, Zen offers us another glimpse of what it means to recognize worth not by weight or shine, but by presence. Here starts the next story. The gates of Kapilavastu had not changed. They still stood tall and carved with symbols of victory, still flanked by soldiers in polished armor, still framed by the scent of sandalwood and rose water poured in offering. But the man walking toward them now was not the same prince who once slipped away into the dark, his silks folded neatly beside a sleeping child. He wore no crown, no jewelry, only the ochre robes of a wandering monk, faded by sun and softened by dust. His feet were bare, his hands folded around a simple begging bowl. And though the guards stiffened at the sight of him, there was something in his stillness, his presence, that made them hesitate. "Is that?" one whispered. But the other could not answer, for it had been nearly 7 years since Prince Siddhartha vanished into the forest. 7 years since the kingdom was draped in grief and silence, since King Suddhodana walked the palace gardens alone, since Yasodhara raised their son Rahula beneath the weight of unanswered questions. Now the prince had returned, but not as a prince, not even as a man of the world. He returned as the Buddha, the awakened one. The message reached the palace like a whisper carried on wind. He has returned. In the great hall, King Suddhodana stood without speaking for a long time. Then, with deliberate steps, he left his throne. No guards followed him, no procession was summoned. He walked alone down the long stone corridor, past the memories carved into every wall. He found Siddhartha standing beneath the Bodhi tree that had been planted in the garden long ago. It was not the Bodhi tree, but it cast the same kind of peace, broad shade, dappled light, and the hush of old leaves. Father and son faced each other, one with hair white as ash and eyes heavy with time, the other with a shaven head and a face so calm it made the air feel still. "You left without a word," the king said at last, his voice steady but thick. "I had no words," the Buddha replied, "only the question. And now you return with answers. I return with understanding. Not to rule, but to teach. Not to reclaim, but to share. The king looked at him long and deeply, as if trying to trace the child he once cradled, the young man who rode out in golden chariots, the son who vanished like a dream before dawn. At last, the king nodded. Then let your mother see you, and let the boy. Yasodhara did not run to meet him. She did not cry. She did not fall to her knees. She stood in the doorway of the inner chamber, her sari plain, her hair pulled back, her face worn not with age, but with waiting. I knew, she said quietly. I knew you had not died. The Buddha lowered his gaze. I died to what I was, he said, so that I could be born to what is. And us, she asked, what are we now? He stepped closer but did not reach out. The rules of a renunciant were clear. No touch, no home, no possession, and yet his eyes held something that made her breath catch. An ache, a reverence, a peace deeper than comfort. I carry you with me, he said, not in desire, but in truth. In knowing that even love must be freed from clinging to shine in full. Behind her, a boy's voice echoed through the hall. Mother, who is it? Rahula stepped into the light. He was 7, just tall enough to look up with question, just old enough to sense what was unspoken. His eyes, so like his father's, widened as he saw the man in robes. He looked at his mother, then back at the man. Is this? Yasodhara nodded slowly. This is your father. The boy approached carefully, drawn not by familiarity, but by gravity. The Buddha knelt, bringing his eyes level with the child's. Rahula looked at the robes, at the bowl, at the bare feet, dusty and calloused. You are a king, the boy said. I was, the Buddha replied, but everyone says you will always be a king. I have chosen another path. Why? The Buddha did not speak right away. Instead, he looked at Rahula, not with the eyes of a father returning, but with the gaze of one who sees the seeds of suffering in even the smallest questions. To be a king is to protect borders, he said. But the greatest kingdom is not land, it is the mind. I left to master that realm, and to help others do the same. Rahula stared at him, then reached out, tentatively, silently, and touched the bowl in his father's hands. Are you hungry? I eat only what is given freely. The boy blinked. I'll give. The next morning, as sunlight touched the eastern gate, the people of Kapilavastu gathered in the streets. They had heard. They had whispered. Some had doubted. Others had hoped. Now they saw. The Buddha walked barefoot through the city with his disciples behind him, his bowl held gently, his eyes neither lifted in pride nor lowered in shame, just present. And beside him, a small boy walked, his steps careful, his face solemn. Who is that? People whispered. That is his son, someone said. That is Rahula. When the procession reached the palace gates again, Rahula turned to his mother. I want to go with him, he said. Yasodhara's heart trembled. You are still young, she whispered. You have not seen the world. But I have seen him, Rahula said, and he is the world. She knelt and held his face in her hands, kissed his forehead, and let him go, not out of abandonment, but out of trust. Rahula turned to his father. Teach me. That night, under a canopy of stars, the Buddha gave his son the precepts. A child novice, a seeker born not of blood, but of choice. He named him Rahula, not in casual use, but in truth. Fetter, for that is what the boy had been once, a golden chain pulling at his heart. But now the chain had turned to light. Not attachment, but connection. Not weight, but legacy. The Buddha looked at his son as he slept beside the fire, curled in a robe too big, holding a wooden begging bowl like a treasure. And for a moment, the silence was not empty. It was full. Years later, Rahula would become a monk in full, respected for his insight and restraint. He would ask deep questions and receive answers not as a prince's son, but as a seeker in his own right. But none would forget that first night. When the Buddha returned, not with chariots, but with calm, not to rule, but to gaze into his son's eyes, and say, without speaking, "I left so you would not inherit illusion. I returned so you could choose the truth." And in that silent gaze was everything a father could offer and everything a seeker could need. 7 weeks passed since his awakening beneath the Bodhi tree. 7 weeks of silence, reflection, and growing compassion. The Buddha, no longer Siddhartha, but one who had crossed the stream of ignorance, walked alone in the forest near Uruvela. The world felt both new and ancient. The birds sang with clarity, the wind carried the scent of blossoms and dust, and in every sound he heard the stillness of knowing. But his heart, now free, did not rest in solitude. He knew the truth he had seen was not his to keep. So he rose, wrapped his robe over his shoulder, and began to walk, not as a prince, not as an ascetic, but as a teacher. His feet touched earth gently, his gaze met all beings with kindness, and he made his way towards Sarnath, where 5 men waited, though they did not know they waited. They were the same 5 ascetics who had left him, thinking he had strayed from the path when he accepted Sujata's offering. They had called him weak, indulgent, lost, but he did not carry resentment, only clarity. The journey was long, days passed, villages blurred, children played in the dust, farmers bowed their heads, some offered fruit, some only stared. But at last, in the quiet of a fading afternoon, the Buddha entered the deer park at Isipatana. There the 5 ascetics sat, wrapped in threadbare robes, debating truths with furrowed brows and hollow bellies. When they saw him approach, they whispered, "He has returned. We will not rise. He abandoned discipline." But as he came closer, something shifted. There was no pride in his walk, no hunger in his eyes, only peace. And before they could speak, they stood, drawn to him not by obligation, but by presence. He greeted them with a bow and sat. Under the dappled shade of sal trees, the Buddha began to speak. He did not speak of gods. He did not speak of punishment or reward. He spoke of suffering, what he called dukkha. He spoke of its cause. He spoke of its end. And he spoke of the path, the 4 noble truths, the 8-fold path, right view, right intention, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, right concentration. He spoke not as a prophet, but as a physician, diagnosing the illness of the world and offering its cure. He taught that the middle way led not to pleasure, not to pain, but to peace. He taught that liberation was possible here. Now the five listened, at first with skepticism, then with stillness, then with something like reverence. And when he finished, he said, "This is the Dharma, deep, subtle, difficult to see, yet available to all who look." And one among them, Kondanya, understood, truly understood. The Buddha smiled. Kondanya has seen, Kondanya knows. And thus, the wheel of Dharma turned for the first time, not with thunder, not with trumpets, but with one man sitting beneath trees, speaking truth to five. That day, the Sangha, the community of practitioners, was born. The Buddha did not seek converts. He sought clarity. He offered a path, not to heaven, but to freedom. And the world, turning slowly, began to wake. That was the first turning, the beginning of a journey that would circle through centuries, that would carry footprints across mountains, across oceans, across hearts, all from one voice, in one park. Among deer, leaves, and sky, the temple's library held thousands of texts, worn scrolls, faded sutras, ink-smudged commentaries written by hands long returned to dust. Monks came to read by daylight when the sun filtered through paper screens, and the scent of old parchment warmed the air. But one monk always came at night. Her name was May. She was quiet, thoughtful, the kind who listened longer than she spoke. Each evening, after her chores were done, she would carry a single candle into the library and read until wax melted low. One night during the rainy season, the wind howled across the hillside. Storm clouds swallowed the moon. Still, May entered the library, lit her candle, sat cross-legged before a scroll on emptiness. The flame flickered with every gust, but she kept reading. Outside, an owl perched in the eaves, white-feathered, wide-eyed. Still, it watched her, unblinking. As the wind swirled harder, the flame bent. Then, it went out. Darkness, total. May did not panic. She closed her eyes and waited. After a moment, she noticed a soft rustling overhead, feathers, then stillness again. She opened her eyes, and though she could see nothing, she sensed the owl was still there. Watching, she whispered aloud, "How do you see in this?" As if in answer, a line from the sutra she had just read returned to her. "The eye that sees true is not of flesh or flame, but of calm presence in the dark." She smiled softly. Perhaps the lesson wasn't in the candlelight, but in its absence. The next day, she spoke with the abbot. "Master," she asked, "why do we fear the dark so much?" He thought for a while. "Because we trust only what the eye can see. But true wisdom," he said, "often waits in the dark." He continued, "The owl does not light a lantern. It simply sees." From that night on, May still brought her candle, but she also learned to sit after it burned out, not to read, but to observe her breath, her thoughts, her discomfort. And slowly the dark became a teacher. Other monks noticed. May was calmer, slower to speak, gentler when correcting mistakes, as if she no longer needed light to know what mattered. One night, a novice joined her. He fidgeted, grumbled at the dark. "I can't see anything," he said. May smiled. "That's the beginning," she said, "not the problem." There's a Zen saying, "Don't curse the dark, don't worship the light, become the eye that sees in both." The owl never flew down, never made a sound. But its lesson stayed with May until the end of her days. Sometimes, the truest clarity isn't found by shining more light, but by learning to sit still when the candle goes out. As the lantern of awareness glows a little brighter, we come to a tale about seeing with more than the eyes. Let the stillness guide you now, and listen carefully to the next story.